The heroine of this story woke up in the Kentrail Earl's mansion. She'd been reborn as Marie, the nanny to little Prince Brielle. Barely opening her eyes, the first thing she had to figure out was if this was heaven or not. Right in front of her was a kid with an angelic face, and she couldn't help but be amazed. His skin was so soft, and the girl hoped he was living a good life. Then she realized she was trapped in a novel when another servant called the kid Prince Brielle. And her name is Marie now, name she recognized from the novel she was reading on her way to work. Now she's got to be a nanny, and thanks to her experience in daycare, it shouldn't be too hard. The scary part is remembering that she was reading this novel right before she kicked the bucket. But then it hit her. According to the plot, she's supposed to off this kid. She couldn't believe she was stuck playing the villain, and she wanted to go home, but she was trapped. Reality hit her hard, and Marie realized there was no going back. A little kid's voice pulled her back from the crushing darkness of despair, and then it clicked. If she went back, this kid would have to die. The very thought of it sent shivers down her spine. Brielle was just a sweet, innocent child, and she couldn't let this angel perish. Marie even started to think she was sent to this world to save Brielle. And that day, she understood her purpose in this novel and stopped trying to return. She'd already spent 3 months in this world, raising the little guy. Brielle's parents died in an accident, and his uncle, Earl Kentrail, adopted him. As a nanny, Marie actually managed to change the original storyline and save the prince. That smoothed things over for his uncle, who in the novel was totally crushed by his nephew's death. She worked with the little guy constantly and was stoked he'd actually get to grow up now. She remembers when the Earl first saw her with Brielle. He thought she was trying to off him. That's when she snapped to and explained she was just doing some special exercises with the kid. That saved her butt right there. And the Earl put away the sword he was about to stick through her throat. Somehow, she managed to actually earn Kentrail's trust. Plus, she really loved this little angel, who was already starting to roll over on his back like crazy. The girl would praise Brielle every time he did something new. While she was playing with him in the living room, the Earl came back and headed straight for them. His face was stern, but his eyes softened when he saw his nephew. The little guy, being a baby and all, just turned to his uncle and let out a burp. Marie told the little prince to be polite and saw the Earl reaching for him, but she immediately turned the baby away and asked his grace to wash his hands first. The servants milling around the room, doing their chores, pretended they didn't see anything. They were used to Marie raising not only Brielle, but sometimes the Earl too. And while Kentrail went off to do as he was told, the girl kept playing with the baby. Then she put him in his crib and felt the Earl hesitating to come in behind her. He had a hard time expressing his feelings, even though he's pretty good looking. But hey, it's his first time raising a kid, so it's totally understandable. The Earl noticed Marie acting weird with Brielle and asked what she was doing. She kept covering and uncovering her face, calling it peekaboo. After explaining the game, she suggested Kentrail try playing it with the little guy too. He wasn't sure it'd work, since he was still hung up on that snitching from the butler. Still, the Earl gave it a shot and realized it wasn't rocket science. Plus, his nephew loved it so much, he started laughing even harder. The Earl liked the little guy's reaction, and even asked Marie if she'd seen it. Then he tried again, and she thought he looked pretty goofy. She was happy her uncle was playing with Brielle, and trusted everything would be all right. More than anything, she wanted to protect the little guy, and she decided to watch over him. Before long, the kid was trying to walk, but he still needed someone to hold him up. Ellie, Marie's sister, came in, and she wanted to walk with them too. She grabbed onto Marie, and the little guy slipped right out of her hands. Marie freaked, thinking he was going to fall and get hurt, or worse. But Ellie managed to jump behind Brielle just in time, so he wouldn't faceplant on the hard floor. He landed right on her fluffy dress, while Marie's heart nearly stopped. Hugging the little dude again, Marie asked Ellie if she was okay. Ellie just stared off to the side, kind of pouting a little. She probably thought her sister was going to yell at her, but Marie was genuinely worried. Marie explained that the floors were hard, so kids could get hurt if they fell. After telling her to be careful, she promised to hold Brielle's hand next time. She stroked her hair so gently that Ellie calmed down right away. And the next second, she was laughing again, like nothing even happened. Originally, Ellie played a big part in getting Marie accepted into the Earl's family as a nanny. Brielle was being fed by this woman, Erin, but she couldn't give him all her time, since she had her own kid. And the real Marie declared that she couldn't trust the heir to anyone but herself. They hired her because of her experience raising her younger siblings. But Brielle himself didn't like this girl at all. Kentrail was already thinking about changing nannies when their relationship suddenly improved. It happened the day the main character woke up in Marie's body. She wasn't sure if it was because of her showing up, but they were still living with the Count's family. And Ellie, when she visited, also wanted to look after Brielle. The girl always loved watching that kid laugh. Later, the little guy learned to crawl and made his way from his playpen right to his nanny. Marie really liked that he was developing so fast, way ahead of schedule, and every time she looked at him, she just couldn't get enough of his little face. Just a month ago, he couldn't even stand, and now he's already taking steps on his own. And if he inherited his uncle's genes, he'll probably grow up tall and strong. The Count hadn't seen the little one in days, because he was tied up with business at the palace. In that time, the little guy had grown a lot, and Marie was sure his uncle would be thrilled. When Kentrail finally managed to get back, the first thing he wanted to do was check on the boy. But the butler told him Brielle was already asleep, which really bummed the Count out. Spotting the nanny, he started asking how his nephew was doing. The girl assured him he was fine, and then mentioned how he seemed to be in a real hurry. It was obvious he wanted to see Brielle more than she thought, so she let him take a quick peek at the little guy, since he was already out cold. Approaching the crib, the Count noticed the boy had lost a noticeable amount of weight. Marie explained that he'd been super active lately, so it was normal. She was already picturing the Count's surprise when he saw how much Brielle had changed tomorrow. Kentrail wanted to stroke his hair, but the nanny explained that he might wake him up. His hands are freezing from the road, and she's betting they're filthy too. That's when she noticed the Count had really slimmed down himself. But she also realized he'd gotten way hotter. She was totally checking him out. Kentrail caught her staring and asked what was up. Snapping back to reality, Marie explained she was going to sing the little guy a lullaby, even though she knew the sleeping kid didn't need it at all. She'd already announced it though, so she had to start singing. A quiet, soothing song immediately filled the room. Marie had a nice voice. She kept singing for a while, noticing how the Count was chilling out. The next morning, while strolling with Brielle, they ran into Kentrail. The Count went straight over to greet the little guy and shake his tiny hand. Then, Marie just had to brag that the little prince was already teething. The Count realized he'd missed that big milestone, and he wanted to spend more time with Brielle. Marie then started lowering the boy to the floor, so the Count could see something else. The kiddo first just sprawled out on the floor, limbs all splayed out. But then, he started bending his arms and legs and pushing himself along. And after a couple of shuffles, he twisted around and plopped down on his cute little butt. Kentrail was blown away. He couldn't believe Brielle could already sit up. Marie was happy to see them having fun together and hoped they could hang out again tomorrow. And she started planning something that she knew they'd both enjoy. She wanted Brielle to try out a sensory play activity. Tons of kids his age are totally into it. She's using seaweed, which people were already eating way back in the Middle Ages, which is kinda wild. And to avoid wasting good food, she used the seaweed that wasn't exactly top shelf. While prepping the bath, she was happy the Earl was working from home again. That way, he wouldn't miss out on Brielle growing up. Hoping this activity would bring them closer, Marie asked the Earl to come over. Not knowing what was up, Kentrail was initially worried about the little one, but then she led him to the tub filled with seaweed. Now, the Earl was completely baffled, and maybe even a little freaked out. He tried to hide it, sure, but you could totally see he was freaking out. Then, Marie explained it was a texture game, good for building muscles and expressing feelings. And she started lowering the kid into the bath so he could start playing with it. But the Count was still sweating it and immediately snatched his nephew back up. Marie, saying there was nothing to worry about, stuck 2 seaweed strips on the kid's eyebrows. He wiggled them and seemed to dig the new sensation. Then he started pulling them off, and that little game was right up his alley. The Count, seeing his nephew was having a blast, figured he could put him in the bath. Then, he started grabbing the seaweed himself and playing with the kid. Brielle noticed how cool the water looked running through his uncle's fingers. Not even knowing how to scoop it up yet, he just started slapping at the water with his hands, which splashed all over his uncle, and Mari got worried he'd blow his top. But Kentrail stayed cool and just slicked back his wet hair. Still anxious, the girl offered him a towel so he could dry off. But at that moment, she slipped on a little puddle from the splashing, and losing her balance, she fell right onto the Count, who was standing in front of her. Feeling totally awkward, she immediately pushed herself back, not wanting him to get the wrong idea. It happened so fast that the Count lost his balance from the shove and went down too. Mari freaked out. Thinking this could be the end of the line for her, Kentrail got up quickly while she started apologizing, not knowing what else to say to explain. Okay, so water spilled on the floor, no big deal, happens all the time. But then Marie started freaking out even more when she felt her heart pounding in her chest. And just to keep things from getting awkward, she bolted out of the room. Later on, Marie was doing some needlework when Ellie came to see her. She got curious about what her sister was up to, and Marie explained she was sewing toys. The little one looked down and realized it was for Brielle, 'cause he's just a little guy. Marie patted her sister, and pointing to the mama bear, admitted it was for the prince. She promised to give Ellie the bunny, but it wasn't finished yet, 'cause it was a big one. It takes more work, so the girl would get it later. Marie was happy to see her little sister acting like a kid, even though she'd grown up so much. This reminded her of the rundown house they used to live in, where toys were a pipe dream. She used the money she earned from the Earl to feed and clothe her sister and brother. But what worried her most back then was that they were home alone all the time. So Marie asked the Earl if they could live with her in her room. He not only agreed, but he also gave them an entire room on the same floor as Brielle. The girl was really happy that she could help them out, even in a small way. A little more time passed, and the little guy was crawling around pretty fast. He'd even managed to escape and hide under the table when it was time for a diaper change. And to lure him back, Marie would use the teddy bear as bait. The little guy loved that toy, and he'd crawl right out of hiding. The second he stepped out into the open, another maid would snatch him right up. After that, they could change him into some clean clothes. Brielle was almost a year old, and Marie wanted to believe everything would be okay. But sometimes, worry would grip her, even on the calmest days. She still had no clue who ordered her to take out this kid or why. In the evenings, Kentrail would read his nephew dragon stories, even though he thought they were pretty messed up. The little guy loved them, and the girl was happy seeing how that reading brought the Count and Brielle closer. Recently, she needed to go pick up some things, but the boy threw a fit, not wanting to stay with anyone else. To spare the servants the trouble, the Count agreed to watch him himself, since Brielle was already used to him. But the butler later said that Kentrail regretted his decision about half an hour later. He couldn't figure out how a 1-year-old could be so damn fast. You couldn't take your eyes off him for even a second. Brielle somehow managed to climb onto the table and grab books, and the Earl was scared he'd get hurt. But the little dude was just busy pawing through the books, chucking them on the floor. One of them landed near his foot and flipped open to a page with a picture. The kid noticed it, and his face suddenly went all surprised. Kentrail didn't know what was up with him, but he got super worried about the little guy. Just then, Marie burst into the study with a suitcase, 'cause the Earl had suddenly called for her. He was already holding the kid, and told her he was worried the little one was coming down with something. The kid had these huge round eyes, and was shaking like he had the chills. And Marie noticed that at the same time, Brielle was totally fixated on one of the pictures. The picture had a dragon on it, and the girl figured out what was going on. The little dude just loved the picture so much, the Count mistook his excitement for sickness. After explaining what was up, she told his lordship not to worry. And that whole thing led to the Count reading his nephew dragon stories. He looked all freaked out then, but Marie pretended not to notice anything. But you could tell Kentrail was practically trembling with fear. The novel didn't go into detail about Brielle's parents' death, just that they died on their way to see the Count. And if Kentrail had arrived just a couple of minutes later, Brielle would have been a goner too. And now, the Earl was freaking out even if the kid just sneezed. But Marie finally understood what was making her boss so anxious. The girl realized this guy was carrying some seriously deep scars. Later, Marie went to draw a bath, leaving Brielle with a maid, and he threw a total fit. The maid, not knowing what to do, started yelling for the nanny until she got back. The kid wouldn't stop crying until he saw Marie, then he calmed right down. And the maid was happy to pawn him off, 'cause she was totally stressed out herself. At times like that, it seemed like the little dude was possessed, man. And Marie took the kid to his room and started changing him. The boy was yelling out some baby gibberish the whole time. And then he said Molly, which is like Marie, but in baby talk. The girl was stunned, 'cause he said her name, not dad or uncle, not even Nanny. And Brielle, laughing and giggling, just kept babbling her name. And somehow, that eased the pain Marie had been feeling ever since she got stuck in this world. She saved him, and that first word of his was like a precious gift to her. Later, his little sister Ellie popped in again and saw them playing. Brielle was learning how to make cool shapes out of empty cups. He was watching the process with total focus, like it was super important. So, naturally, he didn't even notice Ellie, and she decided to fix that. The little girl ran up to the baby and totally accidentally fell on his tower. The boy's eyes went wide with terror, like all his hard work just went down the drain. Ellie apologized and took off running, and Brielle started crawling after her, looking for payback. Watching them, Marie realized Ellie did it on purpose, just to mess with the kid. A little later, she brought the kids some sweet potato for a snack. She even let them grab it with their hands. But Ellie was worried it was still too hot. She picked one up and started blowing on it like crazy to cool it down. Only then did she offer it to the young master, so he could have a bite too. The girl loved taking care of him, then reached for a piece for herself. Marie offered to blow on it for her, but the girl decided to handle it herself. She wanted to be just like her older sister, just as caring. So she was blowing on the potatoes herself to cool them down faster. Then, out of the blue, the little dude giggled and said Ellie's name. After their snack, they decided to read up on dragons for a bit. While they were having a blast, their brother came up to the room and peeked through the crack in the door. Mari wanted to grab some drinks too, and asked Ellie to watch Brielle. As she stepped outside, she saw her brother Barry shuffling his feet. He was holding a ball, hoping to play with the little one too. He was just too shy to come in, so Mari suggested he play with Brielle. She even brought her brother into the room and asked Ellie to include Barry. The boy gave his older sister a grateful look. He flashed a sweet smile, promising they were gonna have a blast. Mari was stoked that her family wouldn't be bored for a second. She wanted to hang out with the little dude too, so she hurried off to grab some drinks. Barry strolled over to the little guy and asked if he wanted to toss a ball around. But his sister, who was already playing with the kid, suddenly got all huffy. She was not happy when the little one started crawling towards another guest. Barry was sure playing ball would be way more fun. Plus he brought a teddy bear. Then, Ellie reminded Barry about that time she cooled down his potatoes for him, and how much fun they had. A squabble broke out between the siblings about who gets to play with the baby. The little dude was torn between familiar Ellie and the bear with the ball. That's when Marie walked in and saw the kids ditched Brielle to start arguing. They got all embarrassed, and the little dude immediately crawled to his nanny, babbling something to himself. She scooped him right up, and he was practically purring, while the other kids realized they were SOL. Marie could tell they were bummed, but even then, they looked kinda cute. Soon enough, it was Brielle's first birthday, and only close friends and family were there. The little guy was loving all the party decorations, even though, instead of a big banquet, the Earl decided to celebrate with just the people from the mansion. Instead of a bunch of snooty nobles, he invited Ellie and Barry, and the table was loaded with good, healthy grub. Barry was tripping out, couldn't believe he got invited to an aristocrat's birthday party, but Marie thought it was the right call, so the kid could see some familiar faces. Because of this, the little guy's actually smiling for real now, and once everyone was settled around the table, the Earl decided it was time to blow out the candle. He suggested they blow it out together, which totally surprised Marie, but Kentrail just told her not to be shy and to come a little closer. So, holding the baby, she got ready to blow it out on the count of 3. She got flustered being so close to the Earl like that. It felt like even Brielle could hear her heart pounding right now. Marie tried to calm herself down, but she couldn't stop shaking. Meanwhile, Kentrail kept counting down to 3, and when he finished, she suddenly realized she'd been spacing out way too much. But she sucked in a breath and joined the count in blowing out the candle. Then she started congratulating the little guy, wishing him the best of health. And out of nowhere, Brielle reached out and planted a kiss on the nanny's cheek. The Count, the servants, and Ellie and Barry were shocked, but totally thrilled. Later that evening, after putting the little one to bed, Mari was just happy Brielle made it to his birthday. In the novel, he didn't even see this day, but now he's gotten through it safe and sound. She was so hyped, feeling like she'd nailed the first goal she set for herself after arriving here. Walking down the hallway, she noticed the Count's room was still lit up. Kentrail wasn't asleep yet, and Mari thought about bringing him some coffee. She quietly peeked through the crack in the door and instantly got worried. The Earl stood before his dead brother's portrait, weeping bitterly. He misses his brother and doesn't know if he can take good care of the kid. He really wished his brother could have seen little Brielle's sweet smile. That's when Marie understood why the Earl threw such a low-key birthday party. He was creating a happy image for the kid, all for his brother's sake. And Marie decided to rewrite her intentions and goals in her diary. Now her goal isn't just to raise Brielle, but to make him happy. Sometime later, when the kid was in the garden, Ellie came barreling towards him again. She was in high spirits, but the kid seemed a little confused. The girl was thrilled that the day had finally come, when they could walk hand in hand. Last time she tried to train him, it didn't exactly go as planned. He's a lot steadier now, but Marie still told her sister to take it easy. Promising that everything would be fine, the happy little thing grabbed Brielle's hand and led him away. He always had a good time with Ellie, and he started laughing again. Noticing he was having fun, she asked him to give her a kiss on the cheek. But then the boy turned away, not wanting to, and Ellie felt a little bummed. Marie saw her sister trying to coax him, and the whole thing was pretty funny to her. At first, she thought about stopping them, but then she changed her mind. After a while, she went to the Earl, saying she wanted to talk, and he immediately got worried, thinking something had happened to his nephew. The nurse said the baby was doing great, and Kentrail chilled out. Marie thought Brielle needed to make some friends his own age, but the Count wasn't so sure, so she figured he just didn't have any connections in high society. In the novel, the Count hated crowds and avoided social events. Out of the whole social scene, he only had 2 real friends. One of them has a kid Brielle's age, and they could totally hit it off. The girl was happy with that and started to leave, but the Count stopped her. He held out a small box and asked her to take it. When she opened it, Marie saw a gorgeous brooch. She already had one, but she never wore it, because she's taking care of Brielle, and besides, it's totally out of style now. Ellie gave her that brooch a long time ago, and she was wearing it the moment she got sucked into this world. But jewelry could be dangerous for a kid, so Mari took it off. She was also worried about what Ellie would say, noticing her sister was different, but the kids accepted her. Now, she thanked the Count for the gift, but her voice was kinda breathy, which made him think she didn't like the jewelry. Then he confessed he picked it out himself, and was worried if it would fit right. Kentrail's never bought a brooch for a woman before, so he's sweating it. The girl immediately flashed a smile, assuring him it was a really beautiful piece, and the Count felt relieved. He really wanted to please her. That evening, Kentrail took the kid, and he called him Uncle for the first time, but it came out kinda harsh. It threw him off so bad, he almost forgot he was looking for a book to read to the little dude. But then he noticed the kid was pissed. Turns out, he was throwing a fit because his uncle was standing too close to Mari. The adults were totally embarrassed, because they weren't even doing anything. So the nanny explained to Brielle that they were looking for a dragon book for him. Then she suggested reading about other animals, but the kid wasn't having it. So the girl started hunting for a different dragon story, something besides the usual one. No luck finding one, so Mari suggested they just make up their own. They grabbed a regular book, pretending to read, but just making up the story as they went. It worked like a charm. Brielle was out like a light in no time, and the nanny tucked him into bed. The Earl helped her put the little one to bed, and she noticed he'd gotten better at it. He'd definitely come a long way since the first time he went in to see the kid. Then, quiet as mice, they tiptoed out of the nursery. But suddenly, the Earl stopped, and Marie bumped her face right into his back. Realizing she'd run into him, Kentrail got worried, asking if she was okay. And in the dim room, lit by moonlight, Marie found herself staring at his face again. It was way too close, and she felt that familiar flutter in her chest. But she immediately pushed the Earl away, saying she was totally fine. Still flustered, she asked him to leave quickly so the baby wouldn't wake up. Kentrail was confused about what just happened. while she was trying to calm herself down. The next day, some kids came over, and Ellie was playing horses with the little guy. They were having races, and Barry was watching nearby. The kid declared he was going to win with the blue ribbon horse, but Ellie shoved another one forward, yelling that the red horse was going to take it all. In that instant, she got a smack on the back of the head from her brother, and they started bickering again about who was better at playing with Brielle. Suddenly, the little dude kicked Barry in the knee and called him a real jerk. The brother and sister were shocked at that kind of behavior, and that the kid even knew words like that. Barry was especially stunned, realizing the little guy was sticking up for Ellie. Brielle had such a fierce little face at that moment. Everything was clear without a single word. But the kid still had to ask why he was swinging those tiny fists around. And the little dude kept babbling, trying to get Barry to back off Ellie. The girl loved it so much, she immediately started hugging her little protector. Barry didn't get the reaction. He just told his sister off, thinking she was teasing the kid. Meanwhile, Marie decided to start drawing animal flashcards. She thought it'd be a good way to show Brielle what they looked like. They weren't exactly masterpieces, but they were close enough. Suddenly, the Count walked over and asked what she was up to. But when he saw the pictures, he thought Brielle drew them, and the girl got all indignant. She felt a little embarrassed, but insisted the drawings looked just like the real thing. She pointed at one of them and said it was an ant, and the Earl smirked a little. Then he did his own drawing, showing what ants should look like. Marie got even more flustered, not understanding how he was so good at it, and she remembered recently asking the butler about the Earl's grades. He had proudly declared that his lordship always took first place in everything. In other words, he's not just a good student, he's an amazing artist too. Suddenly, Cantrell decided to take the drawing of the ant that Marie had made. He wanted to show it to Brielle when he got older. The girl immediately protested and lunged at the Earl to grab the card back. But he just started teasing her, not understanding her reaction, since she was going to show it to the kid anyway. Still, if Brielle figures it out, Marie's gonna die of embarrassment. Reaching for the card, she tripped again and face-planted right into the Count's chest. Things got awkward for both of them, especially Cantrell. But Marie seized the chance and snatched the ant drawing away from him. While she was celebrating saving that cringe-worthy masterpiece, the Count was still flustered. But he even kinda liked that the nanny was acting like a kid for once. Later, Marie told Brielle that a new friend was coming to visit him today. She hoped he'd be excited to see someone his own age. This will broaden his horizons and be the start of his social life. Brielle started asking questions, and the nanny noticed his vocabulary was expanding. Then she brought him to the living room, where Uncle was about to introduce him to a new friend. Jaden was waiting for him, the son of Baron Jake and a close friend of the Earl. The little ginger-haired boy immediately greeted Brielle politely. Then Cantrell left them with the nanny, since he had another important matter to attend to. Left alone with the kids, Marie suggested they play dolls together. After all, little kids love toys, and it's a good way for them to bond. But 10 minutes later, the Earl and his friend burst into the room because they heard crying. In the room, Jaden was on the floor, bawling his eyes out, while Brielle was playing with a teddy bear. They were picking out toys, and the red-headed kid wanted that bear. But that was the toy that Brielle didn't let anyone touch. Mari started apologizing to Jake, but he totally got it. His kid was the same way. Kentrail, on the other hand, was still sweating how this whole misunderstanding would play out. The attempt to get the boys to bond went south, but otherwise the day was smooth sailing. Mari was just glad that Brielle was growing up to be a pretty chill kid. But she still had one major problem hanging over her head. The day she first woke up here, there was already a serious chunk of change stashed away in Mari's house. The real Mari had already gotten a down payment, but nobody ever came looking for her when she didn't deliver. For a while, she kept an eye out, but she didn't see anything fishy. And she was worried that nobody showed up, because the job got passed on to someone else. Now, she had this gnawing fear that it'd be tough protecting Brielle all by herself. She should tell the Earl the kid's in danger, but she didn't know how. Just then, Kentrail showed up behind her and noticed she was all worked up. What's more, he was curious what she was doing outside his office so late. She got so freaked out she clammed up, totally lost for words. She finally choked out that she wanted to tell the Earl something. Kentrail invited her into his office, where she started asking questions. Had he picked out a bodyguard for little Brielle yet? She decided not to spill the whole story, just give him a heads up, especially since she'd seen that Jaden already had a bodyguard. She added that she came so late, because she was scared she'd forget to talk to him about it. She played dumb, pretending to be forgetful, but it totally worked. And Cantrail was happy that the nanny was always thinking of the little guy, and agreed. He even admitted he was planning to go for a ride with Brielle, but Marie was worried it might be risky. The Count assured her they'd be going where the royal guard was stationed, so there was nothing to sweat. The trip's happening soon, since the Count took a long vacation for himself, and Marie got worried that something went down back at the palace. Cantrail realized it had been a while since someone cared that much about him, but he explained he really just wanted to chill after working his tail off. The next day, Ellie was arguing with her brother again about whose turn it was to play with Brielle, and Barry kept insisting the little dude would have way more fun playing ball. Brielle just sat back and watched those two fight over him. Then he pointed out the gardener watering the flowers. Turns out he wanted to splash around, so the kids ran straight for the fountain. Seeing how much they were enjoying it, Marie grabbed some towels for them. That's when she spotted the Earl, who was back super early today. The nanny was about to tell the kids to get out of the water when the Earl just jumped right in. He started having fun with the little ones, like he was a kid again himself. The knight who came with him was in shock, but Marie was actually enjoying the show. But the knight started trying to get the Earl to get back to work, saying he's the chancellor, and everything grinds to a halt without him. Just then, Brielle's little hand reached out for Kentrail, and he started begging his uncle not to leave, but to play with them some more. The Earl was thrilled to hang out with his nephew, which almost gave the knight a heart attack. Marie noticed they sent someone from the palace the minute the master took a day off. It's just, he started smiling, and everyone worried he was coming down with something. Later on, Marie organized a picnic for Brielle and the Earl. So they went to the edge of the park, and the nanny kept telling the little guy not to wander off. The Earl had already set up a location tracker, but he didn't tell the nanny. Suddenly, the little guy spotted something further down the path and started calling for Marie. The girl didn't know the area and didn't want to go, but the Earl promised to stay behind, and Brielle took off down the path, with the nanny barely managing to chase after him. The little dude even managed to slip out of her hand, and the girl started freaking out. Just then, the kid stopped and pointed at a rabbit he'd spotted. Marie smiled and told him what the animal was called. But in that moment, she suddenly got this uneasy feeling. It felt like someone was watching them, and she instantly grabbed the kid. She immediately called for the count, and he showed up in a heartbeat, worried something was up. Marie confessed her suspicion, and she was seriously scared for the little guy. The count looked around but didn't see anyone, figuring whoever it was had already bolted. Just in case, he decided to call for the knights to give the area a more thorough sweep. Then he scooped up Brielle, seeing that Marie was shaking like a leaf from the anxiety. Even though she swore she could handle it, he insisted on carrying him himself. Later, the knights reported they hadn't found anyone suspicious in the park. The girl felt relieved, but the worry in her gut wouldn't go away. And that rabbit went back to the mysterious guy who was keeping score. He thought Marie was living a little too high on the hog for someone who hadn't delivered. Time flew by, and soon it was Brielle's second birthday. This time, a ton of relatives came, from both his mom and dad's sides of the family. This job seemed like a dream to Marie, even though not much had really changed. The little guy was being super cute, hiding behind her skirt all day, because to him, everyone there was a stranger he'd never seen before. And before long, an older guy approached them, with gray hair and a beard. It was Brielle's maternal grandpa, Lord Peronia. He greeted the little dude sweetly and wished him a happy birthday. But the kid just hid further behind the nanny's skirt, spooked by the old dude. Perugna rarely visited, cause their place is like 2 weeks away. Cost him a fortune and a ton of time to get here. But he brought Brielle a present. He pulled a dragon toy from behind his back, hoping the little guy would dig it. The boy snatched it up, stoked. The old man nailed it with the toy, and the nanny reminded the young master that he should say thank you. So, lowering his eyes a bit, he showed his grandpa his gratitude. Noticing her good manners, Lord Peronia complimented Marie on raising him right. He knew taking care of a little kid was tough, but she brushed it off. Just then, Brielle started babbling about his teddy bear, and Marie realized he wanted to take his new toy to it. Apologizing to the old man, she headed back to the house with the little guy. Perona realized what good people surrounded this child, and he told his late daughter, Ari, that she'd be happy to see how her boy was growing up. Later, Ellie called Brielle over to ride the slide before it got dark. She couldn't play with him at the party yesterday, so she wanted to make up for lost time today. When they got to the playground, she told him to go first. She explained you gotta climb up first, then slide on down. She even helped him up the steps, and the little dude went zooming. They both dug it, especially Brielle. Then Ellie started sliding, and the gardener saw the whole heartwarming thing. He was surprised the kid was cooperating, 'cause last time he threw a fit. Next, the girl suggested the little guy go down with the bear. She also noticed the toy had new clothes, and figured Mary had sewn them. That woman pays attention to every little detail when it comes to Brielle. Ellie even got a little jealous, when suddenly the kid mimicked her weird pose. The girl realized he was copying her, and decided to tell him some juicy gossip she'd heard at the market. Marie overheard that, and immediately started grilling her sister about where she learned to talk like that. She didn't want Ellie using that kind of language, because it hurts other people's feelings. A little later at dinner, Marie was feeding Brielle with a spoon, asking him to open wide. And when he was chewing, he looked just like a little baby bird. Suddenly, the nanny suggested that the Earl, who was also at the table, should feed his nephew. The butler practically lost it, saying the head of the family doesn't personally feed a child. But Kentrail told the servant not to worry so much. And taking the spoon, he asked the little guy to try this dish. But he started refusing, no matter how much the Earl tried to coax him. But after a few tries, the little one finally agreed and opened his mouth. And after he finished what was on the spoon, his uncle offered him another helping. This time, Brielle wasn't having any of it. He even turned away. That's when Kentrail picked his moment to ask the nanny a question. He wanted to know if she was free tomorrow evening. Her evening was open, and she was curious about what he wanted. So the Earl suggested they have dinner outside. For a second, the girl was thrown. The Lord's inviting her to dinner just like that. And in this kind of setting, it sounds like a date. But it turned out he was suggesting she have dinner with him and the young master. And now Marie was kicking herself for jumping to such stupid conclusions. As they were leaving, the Count noticed his nephew had gotten noticeably chubbier, and Marie explained that he was wearing a lot of clothes because it was chilly out. So the Count asked her to bundle up too, but she insisted she wasn't cold. Kentrail was worried she'd catch a cold and give it to Brielle, and the girl dashed back inside to get dressed. To make sure that didn't happen, now the Count realized they'd reached a point where he didn't just see her as a nanny. He was sure he wasn't the only one who felt that way, but his nephew too. At dinner, he decided to feed Brielle himself and asked Marie to eat a good amount too. He reasoned that the boy needed to see how well he should be eating, and the girl agreed to try the first bite of the dish. Popping it in her mouth and chewing a little, she realized it was unbelievably delicious. That made her think of Barry and Ellie, who the Count had actually said she could bring along. But Marie decided to leave them behind because it would start unnecessary rumors, and she planned to treat them to the most amazing food here later. While they were having dinner, a couple at another table recognized the Count, but his date didn't get why he was making such a big deal about it. Then she noticed there was a girl with the Count, but the fireplace was blocking her view, and she couldn't make out who it was. The guy was shocked to see the Chancellor smiling. He thought it was just a rumor. Kentrail was always intimidating and demanding. His tone and glare could send shivers down your spine. And now he's sitting there grinning like an idiot, except the fireplace is blocking the view. After dinner, Marie took the little guy to his room and tucked him into his crib, and the Earl asked if her shoulders were sore, since the kid's getting pretty heavy. Marie had been carrying him since the restaurant, and her shoulders were definitely aching a bit. The Earl tried to take the baby, of course, but he only wanted to be held by his nanny, and seeing how tired she was, he offered to give her a shoulder rub. He learned how to relieve muscle tension back when he served in the Knight's Order. Marie sat down on the chair, almost against her will, blushing the second he touched her shoulders. And trying not to show how flustered she was, she asked him to tell her about his time in the Order. The Earl explained that usually second sons join, and that he himself left pretty quickly. Now he wants to hire a tutor for Brielle, someone to teach him how to handle a sword. The timing was right, but Marie couldn't shake the memory of that birthday party. It was his second birthday, and Brielle had set up his dragon figure next to his teddy bear. The kids spotted some of her drawings, just lying around under the little table. Marie picked up a drawing of an ant, and Brielle instantly knew what it was. Then, he started asking why the ant had 6 legs, but even explaining that it was an insect didn't satisfy Brielle, and he kept pressing, and the nanny realized he'd reached that age where everything was fascinating. So that why question was going to keep coming up after every single answer. And to avoid getting sucked into that whole thing herself, she suggested he ask the Count. And then the kid wouldn't shut up about it for like half an hour. Now Mari's saying, we need someone who can actually explain stuff to the little dude. The Count remembered one candidate had a bad stomach at the interview and totally bombed. But they decided he'd be the tutor until the next exam. Soon enough, the tutor's arrival day came, and Mari brewed some tea for them, when suddenly she heard a scream coming from Brielle's room. The girl got freaked out, thinking something terrible might have happened to the kid, and she immediately rushed in there to figure out what was going on. Inside, everything looked relatively calm. Brielle was sitting at the small table, and standing next to him was his teacher, totally startled by the nanny's sudden entrance. The girl realized she jumped to conclusions, but still asked what was going on. And the tutor, Yudges, reported that he was teaching the little master his letters. The kid didn't like studying, so he threw a fit as a protest. Just a few minutes before, Yudges was pointing at numbers and asking the little guy to repeat them. Then he decided to show him how to write the Earl's name. But the kid objected and asked the teacher to write Marie's name instead. The teacher realized this Mari chick must be special, if the little dude was so attached to her. And while he was thinking about the nanny, Brielle lost all interest in studying. So he slammed his hand on the table and yelled that he wasn't doing any more. Yudges tried to persuade him to at least try writing one word. But the little dude was kicking up a fuss, and Marie heard the crying when she was bringing in the tea. The second she walked in, the kid bolted straight into her arms. He wanted her to protect him. Plus, he wasn't used to being away from her yet. And the teacher started asking about the little guy, what he didn't like, so he could avoid that stuff during lessons. After class, Brielle took Barry outside to play and was spinning him around in the air. Marie watched them from the balcony, and she loved that those two played together so often, and that the little guy loved being spun around. Ellie couldn't do that. She's not as strong as her brother. No sooner did Marie think about her than she showed up, bringing Brielle a wreath. She wanted to do something for the little guy instead of acting all jealous and dumb. And now she asked him to try on the wreath she'd woven herself. But the little dude refused, and the girl figured he just wasn't feeling it. Seeing Ellie bummed out, Brielle tilted his head at her, and she carefully put the wreath on him. And Barry suddenly got all flustered. He realized the kid was just getting caught up in Ellie's performance, but he wasn't going to call her out on it. Watching them, Marie decided to come up with a game they could all play together. And she remembered how they used to mess around in the water. Even Kentrail had a blast back then. Meanwhile, the king showed up at the Earl's place and noticed how hard he was grinding. He was worried the Chancellor was forgetting to eat, because he was looking kinda thin. From where he was standing, it looked like the Earl wasn't even thinking about food, just work, work, work. and he wasn't thrilled about the king's surprise visit. Like the guy didn't have anything better to do. The king offered him a drink and a place to crash, said it was gonna rain tonight. The count turned him down, so His Majesty chuckled and guessed someone was waiting for him back home. One of the secretaries ratted him out, said Kentrail's been smiling a lot lately. Then, he remembered Brielle's birthday was coming up in a few months. The king decided he'd personally throw his third birthday bash and officially announce him as the count's nephew. And he's also just dying to see when the chancellor finally pops out some kids of his own. Because there's talk going around that he's got a real looker for a nanny. That's when the count snapped and demanded to know who was spreading those rumors. He realized then he was pissed off just because another dude was talking about the nanny. Still, if the rumors keep spreading, Marie could get dragged into a whole mess. Meanwhile, she was going through Barry's stuff and realized she'd have to buy him new clothes. He'd gotten too big. She was actually excited to see what her brother and sister would be like when they grew up. It was raining outside, and Marie noticed a bird fly up to the window, but she couldn't open the window, didn't want a draft, even though she felt bad for the bird. Glancing out the window, the girl suddenly spotted a figure in the distance. For a second, she had a really bad feeling, and she stepped out onto the balcony. She immediately thought about that money she had stashed away at home, and she figured it was someone coming for her, someone who wanted to cause trouble for Brielle. She saw the dark figure watching the place. Her fingertips started to tremble, and she got chills all over. Because reading about something and actually experiencing it are two totally different things. Shaking with fear and anxiety, the girl started asking, "Who's there?" But the figure hiding behind the tree, watching, vanished in a flash. Marie even wondered if she was just seeing things. But considering everything that had been happening, she knew someone was definitely watching her. In the novel, Ellie was sitting outside her house in the same kind of rain, late at night. Her sister and brother were super late, and the little kid didn't have a key. The girl had to wait. She was freezing, but also burning up at the same time. And after a while, she passed out right there by the door. The neighbors saw the girl lying there, felt bad for her, and took her inside their place. They were whispering, and Ellie, hearing their voices, thought Marie was back. But they were quietly saying Marie ditched the kid and ran off with her brother. Because the boys got potential, plus she grabbed all the cash and valuables. That's when little Ellie realized the harsh truth. She'd been abandoned. The next day, they saw Marie coming back to the house with Barry. They were pissed she didn't even say hi to the ones looking after her sister. The real Marie didn't take responsibility for them out of some sense of duty. She stuck around because she had nowhere else to go, plain and simple. But then she started fattening them up big time, forcing them to eat more and more. And when the kids were so stuffed they couldn't eat another bite, Marie would get all bent out of shape, and she wouldn't let them leave the table until they'd cleaned their plates, always going on about how hard she worked to put that food on the table. Truth is, she saw the Earl's ad looking for a nanny, and thought that if they saw her taking good care of his brother and sister, it'd score her some extra points. Marie got into debt, and when they came calling for the money, she tried to ditch Ellie and run. But the cash she had left dried up fast, and she was looking for a job where she could make a quick buck. That's when the original Marie, the one who became the nanny, got mixed up with some seriously shady characters. Now she's wondering if that person who approached her is the same one the tree was talking about. She tried to tell herself that the Earl's guards wouldn't let any strangers in. These thoughts were driving her crazy, and she didn't know what to do. That's when Ellie called out to her, worried her sister was getting soaked in the rain. Marie didn't even realize at first that this sweet little girl was standing in front of her, the one who was originally abandoned, and who was now smiling so sweetly. Then Brielle came out too, grabbing a towel and handing it to their nanny. These kids wanted to help Marie because she was completely drenched. And realizing she wasn't alone, that she had these kids, Marie felt a surge of happiness. She even let them dry her wet hair themselves. Later, Marie told the Earl that she'd seen a suspicious person on the estate. She couldn't make out his face, he was too far away, and he disappeared right away. It suddenly hit her that they hadn't found anyone during the picnic either. And Mari was worried if the Count would even believe her now, since no one had seen that guy again. But Kentrail immediately agreed to organize another squad of knights, and he promised to personally oversee how the knights would be selected. Suddenly, Mari realized that the Count always listened to her, without ever questioning anything. Still, she was really grateful for the trust he placed in her. Thinking about it, she closed her eyes for a moment, but then noticed the Count was looking at her strangely, and when she asked what was wrong, he assured her that everything was fine. But now she couldn't shake the feeling, wondering why he had that look on his face. Kentrail just advised the nanny to go get some rest. Meanwhile, he remembered the king's words, how he thought the nanny was quite the looker. Right then, the Count felt like crap, and couldn't put his finger on why. What's also eating at him is that someone's tailing that girl. Later, Mari started spoon-feeding Brielle, but this time, he really threw a fit. And the nanny figured he just hates being treated like a baby. Then, out of nowhere, he points right at the soup and asks to be fed. He's getting to the age where he can start learning table manners. The little guy was growing up, and Mari knew one day he wouldn't need her anymore. But right now, he's so sweet, and she wished he could stay that way a little longer. The girl had grown attached to this little dude, who accepted her without a second thought. After a while, Mari went back to the Count with another request. She'd noticed Brielle had been acting a little weird lately. He wasn't sick or anything, but she was worried something was up with him. Cantrell was thinking hard, even though he wasn't exactly a child-rearing expert. But he also hadn't asked what was going on, like he usually does. Mari was dying to get an answer, and asked him to give her his take, and the Earl told her to just chalk it up to kid stuff. Somehow he knew it was all just a phase. The thing is, just recently, a puzzled Brielle had run up to him. The Earl was even surprised he was alone, even though the kid's getting older. And the little guy started asking his uncle if he had a special someone. And he also told him, under no circumstances, to get married until he was older. Cantrell was confused, but the butler cleared things up for him. Just a few hours earlier, Brielle and Jaden were drawing pictures. The little count was drawing his bear, but it looked more like a monster. And his new friend decided it didn't look like a bear because it was sick. Brielle was a little bummed that he couldn't draw as well as his uncle yet. Recently, Marie had shown him some of the cards the count had drawn. And Brielle really wanted to be able to do everything like his uncle Cantrell. And then Jaden announced that Uncle Count couldn't do everything, because he's always at work and doesn't have a special someone. Then he asked Brielle if he liked his nanny, hinting that if the Earl got married, this lady would force the nanny to leave. Brielle was completely blown away by this news. The butler and a couple of other servants overheard the boys' conversation. In the end, Cantrell promised his nephew he wouldn't get married, but he didn't admit that to Marie. He was also bothered that as soon as he heard about his favorite, he immediately thought of the nanny. So Marie never found out the reason. The Earl just assured her everything was fine. He even made sure they had an escort, even for a short walk, the goal of which was to buy a birthday present for Ellie. Oh, and he reminded him that Brielle's squad of knights would be formed soon. But Marie was still worried, because the potential threat hadn't gone away. She was convinced that the guy she saw that rainy day was egging her on to do something bad. The day she died, a side story came out about Brielle's client, and she didn't get a chance to read it. So, the girl had no idea who wanted him taken out. While paying at the store, she noticed a shady character flash by outside. A wave of anxiety washed over her, and she clutched Brielle tighter. She recognized Derek, the guy with the biggest sword in the kingdom. In the original story, he was a loyal henchman of the Dark Earl Cantrell, and someone who eliminates his enemies without a second thought. Marie couldn't figure out why he was in the capital, since the story had already changed, but fear gripped her mind. The thought that the Earl might have summoned him here. Even the kid noticed she was lost in thought, and started calling out to her. And after asking him to ignore it, she suggested they head home. A few hours later, when night had completely shrouded the estate in darkness, a man with a nasty scar on his face and a vicious look slipped inside unnoticed. It was Derek, and he'd come to the estate on the Earl's orders. Cantrell invited him to sit down and decided to get straight to the point. The Earl called this guy because he's convinced his brother's death wasn't an accident. After the celebration, he was talking in front of his brother's portrait about how Brielle's grandfather visited, and he believed that the late Aerie was happy from above to see her father alive and well. That day, he found a note hidden behind the portrait. Now, at night, the Count knew this could be risky. He asked Derek to stand by him, ready to fight together. Derek gripped his sword with both hands, held it out in front of him, and reminded the Count that he was the only one. The only one who'd been there for him through thick and thin, and he'd always have his back. And Cantrell thanked Derek for that knightly vow. Soon, Brielle's third birthday arrived, and important people from the capital were invited. Not long before, there was Ellie's celebration, which also got special attention. But now, with the capital's aristocrats invited, it could stir up all sorts of rumors, from Brielle becoming the heir, to the boy's parents' unfortunate demise. They're gonna be talking about his birthday bash for sure. The Earl didn't want to mingle with the guests, so he went looking for Brielle. The kid was getting ready to make his entrance, and was totally freaking out. The Earl turned to the nanny and suggested she come downstairs with them. She was stoked about the offer, but she still turned it down. She told them to go on without her, even when the little guy begged her. She promised him she'd come down with them next time. She knew a noble aristocrat shouldn't be seen arm in arm with a nanny on such a big day. Soon, they announced the arrival of Earl Cantrell Durant and young Master Brielle Durant. The guests immediately noticed how cute the boy was and how much he looked like his dad. There was a small set of steps ahead, and Cantrell reached out his hand to the little guy, just to make sure he got down safely. Meanwhile, Mari watched from the balcony, thinking about raising Brielle in a safe place. It's the main reason she stayed here, and she's good with that. A little later, she went outside to get some fresh air and clear her head, when suddenly, someone came up behind her and put a shawl around her shoulders. Turning around, she saw the Earl, who was worried she wasn't dressed warmly enough for the cool air. Then, he told her how Brielle greeted everyone, and then went to his room with Jaden. The Earl noticed a bottle of wine, and wondered why Mari was drinking out here all alone. He was worried she might fall down the stairs, but she assured him she doesn't get drunk that easily. Suddenly, she remembered how the Count in the novel had changed. He swore revenge and wept in despair. And now, sitting with him on the steps, she promised they would protect Brielle. The Count didn't understand why Marie brought that up now, but he agreed with her. He also thanked her for always genuinely caring about the little one. He would have struggled alone, and he realized that this girl gave him strength. He also hoped that one day he could express his feelings for her. Sometime later, when the Count was at the royal palace, He unexpectedly ran into the queen, and she asked him to stay a moment. She was only accompanied by 2 maids, even though they say she's extravagant, and when she greeted him politely, the count knew she was fishing for gossip. But he warned her right away to watch her mouth. Her Majesty assured him there were no prying ears around, nothing to worry about. Besides, they're family, even if they only see each other once a year. Then she asked how little Brielle was doing. Deep down, she was a little jealous, because she didn't have any kids yet. But the count was sure she and the king would have an heir soon enough. And the queen changed the subject, wondering when Kentrail would get married. Though it's unlikely anyone would marry him, since Brielle's inheriting everything. Meanwhile, the boy was training with a friend and bragging to the nanny about winning again. And Jaden grumbled at him to keep it down, not yell it all over the house. So, to calm them down, Marie brought them drinks and told them they were both doing great. Brielle was already learning fencing, and Barry was training right alongside him. And the other knights at the count's estate were really singing his praises. Marie was handing out lemonade to everyone, even the fencing instructor Taylor, and thanking him for taking her brother under his wing. Brielle saw them chatting and started begging the instructor for another practice round. And he wouldn't agree to take a break, even when Taylor told him to. Meanwhile, the nanny noticed that the little guy had been super energetic lately. The boy was also learning to ride horses, but he wasn't feeling it. The second they put him on that horse, he was begging to be taken down. The horse was huge, but the Earl figured Brielle would learn faster that way. And Marie, standing off to the side, was worried about the kid and told him to hang in there. Even though he was whining, he looked so cute to her, she wanted to smile. Meanwhile, the Earl kept explaining that once he learned to ride a big horse, he could ride the smaller ones too. He also told him not to be scared, knowing his nephew was totally freaked out. To calm Brielle down a bit, the Earl hopped up behind him in the saddle, and together they did a little loop, so the kid could see it wasn't so bad. Brielle really did chill out and even bragged to the nanny that he knew how to ride a horse, and Marie was happy for his progress and waved to him from a distance. Just then, Kentrail remembered how his own father taught him to ride a horse the exact same way. He was riding with him too, saying it's better to learn on a big horse. Marie was so busy checking out Brielle, she didn't even notice the horse come up behind her. He was snorting softly and sniffing her shoulder, kinda spooking her out. And the stable hand noticed the horse liked the nanny, which is saying something, 'cause he usually hates everyone. The animal seemed really gentle, and Marie stroked his nose. Taylor came over and suggested she give it a try, just once. But Marie didn't know how to ride, so the guy offered to help her out. Then he explained the horse's name was Dan, and he usually keeps to himself. So now if they ride together, he'll finally get his shot at taming this white stallion. Plenty of knights have tried to ride him, but they all ate dirt. The girl was a little worried they weren't supposed to be riding. But Taylor's got some free time now, since the Earl's watching Brielle, and Mari went along with it, since she never even got to ride a horse in her past life, even though she wanted to. For a second, she thought it'd be fun to have some kind of race with Brielle. Just then, Taylor came up to her, and looking apologetic, reached out his hands. He just wanted to help her get in the saddle, since she was wearing a dress. And when Mari was finally on the horse, she noticed he was smiling way too sweetly at her. Meanwhile, Brielle really wanted Marie to come ride with them, and the Earl figured it would be a good idea to teach the nanny how to ride, just in case. While he was thinking, Brielle suddenly started screaming his head off, like something terrible had happened. But that's exactly how it felt to him when he saw another dude touching his nanny. It was right when Taylor was helping her get up on the horse. The kid still grumbled that you gotta ask him before you lay a hand on his nanny. He even shook his fist at Taylor, saying that Marie was gonna marry him. Just kid stuff. But the Earl felt like he'd been doused with ice water. A little later, the butler reported to the Earl that Mr. Derrick had settled in the capital safe and sound. Kentrail thanked him for the good news and dismissed the servant. He sat in his chair for a few minutes, closing his eyes and lost in thought. Then, he took his brother's diary out of the desk drawer and reread some lines. He was trying to figure out how he died, leaving behind a little kid. Just then, Marie knocked, and the Earl put his notepad aside. The girl showed him cookies she and Brielle had baked, asking him to try one. Plus, the little guy had even made the cookie shapes himself. Little bears. The Earl realized he'd missed the moment his nephew learned to do stuff like that, even though he saw him tackling challenges and being proud every single day. But it felt like if he blinked, Brielle would grow up and out from under his wing. And Marie was even more convinced the Earl wasn't the cold fish everyone thought he was. At least, she could see right through him now, knew exactly what he was thinking. Working as a kindergarten teacher, she'd learned you can't hold kids back from growing up. And noticing the Earl was hesitant to eat the cookies, she just shoved one in his mouth. And she said it wasn't too late to spend some quality time with Brielle. She also suggested the Earl tell the little guy how much he loves him more often. Then, everything would definitely be all right between them. Cantrail started thinking about words of love and immediately went bright red. Marie noticed and thought he had a fever, but he insisted he was fine. But the girl was worried. She sees how much time he spends in his study and how little he sleeps. And while she was asking questions, Cantrail suddenly swayed. Then, he suddenly dropped his head onto her shoulder, which made her even more anxious. The Earl passed out, and later Brielle came to check on him with the nanny. The boy was worried. But according to the doctor, he should be better after 3 days of rest. Dude was burning the candle at both ends, wound up catching a cold. Marie told Brielle to stay away from his uncle so he wouldn't get sick, but he refused. He only agreed when the nanny promised to check on his uncle later, once he was feeling better. Then she sent the boy off with the butler, while she stayed behind with the Earl. She kept vigil by his bedside, changing his compress every so often. Before long, the fever broke, and Kentrail came to, even managed to eat some soup. Marie said that Brielle had been really worried about him and was crying, and that she was taking care of the Earl so the boy wouldn't catch anything, not admitting she was worried herself. She also told him to ease up on the work and spend more time with Brielle. After Kentrail finished eating, she gave him his medicine. The stuff tasted kinda bitter to the Count, but the nanny knew he was just being a baby. Without even thinking, the girl giggled, then clammed up. But the Count actually liked it. Marie blushed, explaining she'd been looking after him lately because she had to. But even that didn't bum the Count out. He even decided to open up a little. He wanted her to feel comfortable around him, you know? The way he said it was kinda weird, and Marie didn't get what he was driving at. And Kentrail reminded her that they were family now. The girl agreed, 'cause it had been a long time since she started working there, and she really had gotten close to the Count and Brielle. Still, hearing that from Kentrail was the last thing she expected. She almost regretted trash-talking the Count while she was reading the novel. This puppet master caught a lot of flack from the fans, including her. Marie even got a little emotional now that she understands him so much better. And if she hurts Brielle, things are gonna end way worse than in the original story. Once the Count finished his medicine, she asked him something, whether anyone held a grudge against him, and that question kinda threw him for a loop. But Marie brought up the fired officials or servants from the mansion as examples. She wasn't saying he did anything to them, just asking, you know? And Kentrail said without hesitation that there weren't any people like that here or at work. But it was clear that questions like that bummed him out. And Marie decided to leave him, telling him to get some rest. After she left, the Count kept mulling over her questions. Something felt off about them. He remembered her mentioning that she'd sensed someone else was there. Truth is, a lot of people have it out for him since he became Chancellor. More importantly, they're targeting Brielle, and the Count figured it might be connected to the animosity towards his brother. Their parents also died after getting caught up in some kind of incident. Thinking about it, the Count suddenly had a shocking realization. The next day, he felt much better, and Brielle greeted him in the hallway. The boy was happy that his uncle was feeling better after getting some rest. He wanted to give him a gift and held out his tiny hand. The kid opened his hand and gave the Count a piece of candy, picking out the sweetest one, so the uncle wouldn't feel so grossed out when he had to take his nasty medicine. Brielle bragged that he knew all about it from a super reliable source. Just then, Mari showed up, the one the little dude had managed to ditch, and the Count realized that the nanny was the one who told Brielle about the bitter medicine. That reminded him he was actually meaning to ask her something. The girl gave him a curious glance. Then she headed to his study, where he said he wanted to send Barry to the academy. He can't learn everything here, but the Count wants Mari's opinion. She wondered if a kid from a broken home would ever get another shot like this. Because it costs so much, even noble families only sent their eldest son there. Marie hesitated to accept the offer, feeling like she'd already gotten so much. But the Earl had heard rumors that Barry was pretty damn good with a sword. And at the academy, he'd learn even more techniques and hone his skills. The Earl sees it as a plus for their family, reminding her that he'd already acknowledged them as family. Marie understood that until the person who ordered the attack was caught, everyone was in danger. So, to protect everyone, she agreed to let Barry enroll in the academy. Now all that was left was to get his opinion, and Marie went to call for him. Just then, Brielle started screaming, making a grumpy face. Breaking free from the nanny, he bolted out of the room. He didn't want to be separated from Barry. The decision was made, even though Marie's family was sad to see her go. But the rest of the mansion took it easy and congratulated Barry. Everyone except the young master, who got pissed and hid in the garden. Barry went after him right away, and found him almost immediately under a rose bush. Brielle declared he wouldn't talk to him until he left, and Barry started teasing him in a friendly way, but the little guy just turned away more. Of course, the little one was sad that the person he'd gotten so used to was leaving. Barry understood that too, and he was also sad to part with the little rascal. So he started asking him not to be upset, because he was leaving to study, not abandoning him forever. In the end, Barry couldn't hold it in anymore and started crying, then hugged Brielle tightly. The kid was bummed, saying he wouldn't have anyone to train with or give him piggyback rides anymore. But he knows the academy's a huge opportunity and didn't ask Barry to stay. The kid even calls him bro, even though he's just his nanny's brother. And Barry swore he'd be back when he's a knight, and Brielle would be his lord. Then he told him not to be sad but to keep growing into the same kind and awesome dude. And the kid told him to hurry up and become a knight and come back already. With that, the sad goodbye got a little sweeter, and Barry headed off to the academy. And Ellie, even though she said goodbye cheerfully, couldn't hide how lonely she felt afterwards. Marie felt bad seeing her like that, and wanted to do something for her. Walking up to her sister, she suggested they go for a walk tonight. They'll have a blast. Plus, it's the king's birthday today. They strung up flowers all over the streets for the celebration. and musicians were playing all night. The royal guard beefs up security at times like this, so nothing bad's gonna happen. Marie suggested going out after the little master falls asleep, and when night blanketed the streets, she and her little sister slipped out of the estate. It really was a lot of fun, and Marie even bought Ellie some kebabs. Then the girls spotted a dance floor and begged to go. They twirled and laughed through a couple of dances to the upbeat music. It was a moment where Ellie forgot all her troubles and her brother leaving, and Marie was happy that her sister had stopped being so down. Out of nowhere, teacher Yujays walked up to them, stoked to see Mari. 'Cause usually she's swamped during school days. Mari noticed her little sister giving the guy a weird look. She didn't recognize him, so Mari introduced him as Brielle's teacher. After that, Yujays gave the nanny sister a polite hello. Then, he suggested they all grab a drink, and they were down. Ellie asked for orange juice, but for himself and Mari, Yujays suggested something with a kick. She figured one glass couldn't hurt, so she went for it. Besides, Yuji's wanted to treat them for hanging out with him. Over a beer, he confessed he was gonna buckle down and focus on the exam. And Ellie pointed out that they looked good together, since her sister would have to find her own happiness someday. Even though she saw the Earl as a potential match too, and even tried to compare them, she'd been taught that when a special vibe pops up between adults, it's time to make yourself scarce. Realizing that was happening right then, the girl announced she was going to the restroom. Marie told her to be careful, and Ujas noticed the girl was very energetic. Ellie really was a pretty lively kid, unlike her sister. And now that she'd left the adults alone, she hid around the corner to watch. Ujas shared his opinion that Brielle was the cutest little troublemaker in the family. He said as soon as a nanny shows up, he gets all grumpy, even though he's usually so well behaved. Marie kept quiet about disagreeing with him, because that little guy was just pure charm to her. Ellie saw those two laughing together, and hoped her sister would be happy. She wished Marie would meet someone who'd actually care about her. Meanwhile, the Earl was in his study, sorting through documents, realizing a big day was coming up fast. And about the king's birthday, it was also the very first day Brielle arrived at the palace. Marie dressed him up so he'd be the most dazzling one there. Just like his uncle, though nobody can really compare to him. Just then, Cantrell walked up and wondered why he was considered so unique. The girl blushed, and also noticed that the Earl looked more handsome than usual today. But she quickly corrected herself, saying the only incomparable one is Brielle, who just then came up to his uncle and asked him to check out his look. Cantrell scooped the little dude up and declared he was definitely the best. This kid's gonna show everyone what's what with his manners today, and the nanny's got faith he'll nail it. Soon, the arrival of Earl Durant and his heir was announced at the palace. Some of the ministers who hadn't finished their assigned tasks started sweating bullets, and the ladies started gossiping about their chances of marrying the Earl or his nephew. They were dying to know which lady would get lucky and snag that prize. Pretty soon, Baron Jake spotted Cantrell and headed straight for him. He was running a little late, but since the king wasn't there yet, no harm, no foul. Their kids started chatting too, and Jaden confessed how strict his mom was being. The Earl overheard and realized these lovebirds had a little spat. Just then, a lady came over and introduced her little daughter, Layla. The boys turned around right away, and the girl looked a little freaked out. The woman suggested the boys dance with her daughter later, but the little dudes started protesting, saying they were too young to dance, and the Earl sternly told the lady and another baron who'd wandered over to knock it off. It pissed him off that these aristocrats would even use kids for their own gain. It's because of people like that Cantrell can't stand high society. Soon enough, the king himself showed up, and the Earl went over to greet him. He knelt down like he was supposed to, and Brielle copied him. Then, the king asked the boy to come closer, so he could get a good look at how cute he'd gotten. The kid got closer, but then something caught his eye. The king had this massive crown on his head, totally decked out in jewels. And Brielle told his uncle he was worried the king's neck must hurt from carrying all that weight. Cantrell smiled at his nephew and agreed that was probably the case. The king chuckled, amused to see the chancellor actually crack a smile. Then, he asked Brielle to come even closer. The kid looked at his uncle, waiting for the okay, and he gave a subtle nod. So the boy slowly took a few steps toward the king, and when he got right up close, the king grabbed him and plopped him on his lap. The queen, sitting next to him, was a little shocked by this, but she didn't say anything. And just like that, Count Cantrell was hit with a wave of anxiety and resentment. You could hear the nobles buzzing behind him, totally clueless about what was going on. The count immediately snatched Brielle back, saying the king's little game had gone way too far. All he wanted was to hold the cute little angel just once. But the count knew that a kindness from a king with no brothers could have a hidden agenda, especially since he was hugging Brielle, a relative of the queen, even if it was a distant one. But that could really stir things up with the aristocracy. After that, the furious count stormed out of the royal palace without even congratulating the king. And now, he's refusing to go to work, holed up at home for days. Losing a chancellor as skilled as him is going to put a ton of pressure on the king. But Cantrell was spending all his time hanging out with Brielle and the nanny's family these days. People around town figured he'd started a family, and Mari kept having to explain that wasn't the case. But the Earl told her not to argue and just enjoy playing house for this vacation. They strolled through the city streets, Cantrell giving Brielle a piggyback ride. And after all the talk about family, The little guy suddenly called the nanny Mom. Mari was totally shocked, of course. She didn't even know what to say. A shopkeeper, seeing how happy they looked together, decided to give them a warm roll. She asked them to share it, and Mari thanked the woman. They kept walking, and the little dude noticed other families having a great time together. Then he looked back at Mary and Ellie, who were already sharing the roll. Seeing how happy they were, I couldn't help but laugh along. While they were enjoying their walk, some dude was watching them from around the corner. After a while, the Earl and his nephew got an invitation. He didn't really want to go to the event, even though the butler suggested he should, but he said he'd only go if the king apologized. And he also demanded that every kid in the capital had to sit on his lap. Now the Earl was wondering if he should go back to working at the palace anytime soon, cause he was enjoying the break, even though he was still dealing with stuff around the house. Finding out Brielle was with the tutor, he asked where the nanny was, and the butler reported that she was out on the terrace, reading a book. The servants noticed the Count's been asking about the nanny more and more. And now, ditching his paperwork, Cantrell says he feels like catching up on the news too. Stepping onto the balcony, he spotted Marie in the garden, head bent over a book. Before she knew it, the girl had dozed off. It wasn't the first time, so the Count asked the butler to have a maid throw a blanket over the nanny. But he immediately got worried when he saw Marie's head slump onto the table. The girl just kept sleeping. Then someone covered her with a blanket. After a while, Marie felt noticeably warmer. Opening her eyes, she saw a blanket on her and a pillow under her head. Curious to know who had looked after her so well, she went to investigate. Not far off, she spotted the butler, lurking around the corner like he was waiting for orders. The girl called him over to help her out and asked who had covered for her, and he confessed that it was the maid, on the master's orders. What's more, the maid did it with a real spring in her step. Because Mari's always so kind to everyone, and the maid was all flustered about it. The butler glanced up at the balcony, where Cantrell had been standing just a moment ago, and announced that he wanted to show Mari his appreciation too. Because thanks to her, the master and the young master smile a whole lot more often. The girl blushed and pointed out that the butler himself always works really hard. Later, Brielle demanded a game of hide-and-seek, and all the servants got dragged into it. Ellie told her sister where she was going to hide, and her sister told the little one to be careful. Marie ducked behind a pillar, knowing Bree would find her there quick. But that was the whole point, so she even stuck her leg out to be more obvious. Just then, she noticed a bookshelf. There were so many books, it was overwhelming, but one of them caught Marie's eye. She immediately reached for the top shelf to grab the book, and since it was pretty high up, Marie almost lost her balance. But then, like magic, the Earl appeared behind her and caught her. She got a little spooked, because she didn't see him coming, though the Earl figured she was faking it and asked what she was up to. He's also wondering why she needs a book about the kingdom's history. Marie said she wants to brush up on her knowledge, since Brielle keeps asking her questions. The Count agreed that these books should help with that, and for a second, he thought she was kinda cute. But then he immediately freaked out at his own thoughts. Feeling awkward, he started asking about the hide-and-seek game, and the nanny explained how it works. Brielle's supposed to find her, but he's been gone a while, and she was about to go look for him herself. Marie's sure the little guy's having a blast with this game. Suddenly, the Count's expression changed, like he saw something that scared him. He saw an arrow smash through the window behind the nanny, heading right for them. The Count grabbed Marie and pulled her close, dodging out of the way so she wouldn't get hit. The yank was so brutal, they hit the floor hard. Mari's eyes snapped open. She felt blood on her face and panicked about the Count. Cantrell got to his feet, a little banged up, blood trickling from a gash on his temple. Seeing that freaked her out even more, but she was just glad he was alive. Mari was okay too, just shaken, and she had a bad feeling about what that was. Right then, the butler burst into the room. He'd heard the crash, and the Count ordered the nanny taken to a safe room and to seal every door in the mansion. The nanny was still shaking, thinking she was the one they were after now. Soon, the only people left in Mari's wing were those they could trust with their lives. The girl's jitters from the attack started to finally fade away. The knight realized the Count was way too hung up on this dame. Taylor told Marie to stay put in the room with the kids, promised he'd be back as soon as things cooled down. The girl knew that because of her, not just Brielle, but the Count was in deep trouble now, and if she'd just finished that chapter describing the perp, things would be different. Suddenly, the door behind her swung open, and Marie jumped a mile. But it was just the kids, curious about what was going on. The little ones were confused seeing Marie's worried face, so not to freak them out, she told them she just ate too much for dinner. Ellis immediately offered to pat her on the back, and Brielle took the nanny by the hand. Marie smiled at them and decided to have a nice evening with them. As long as those little guys are keeping her warm, she's got nothing to fear. Still, even after 2 days, they haven't caught the perp. Euges came to the estate again and politely greeted Ellie when he saw her. The little one recognized Teacher Brielle. She remembered him from last time. Today, Euges wasn't here for the little master's lesson. He passed his exams and came to share the news, since lessons will be less frequent now. He sensed a strange vibe and started asking what was up, but the little girl couldn't answer, 'cause she doesn't know anything herself. Neither her sister nor the Count tell her anything. The servants are also keeping quiet, and Euges decided to go say hi to the nanny when Brielle caught up with him. He flashed some document at him and said he didn't understand a word of it. Then he started demanding an explanation, even though class wasn't in session today. And Yudges agreed, but just asked the kid not to run off like that. But Ellie sensed something was up and started racking her brain for what to do. She headed to the Earl's office, wanting to spill the beans about something. Kentrail himself opened the door for the little one and asked what was going on. In a serious tone, the girl stated that she had some important intel, and after stepping inside, she explained she'd spotted a suspicious character by the mansion near that big tree, where she found a huge hole in the ground. But the Earl reassured her, saying they had reliable knights here, and anyone showing up would be caught immediately. And Ellie swore that the guy she saw in the hole was definitely a knight. She spotted him while playing with Brielle, but didn't think much of it at the time. The Earl had once told her and her brother that this was their home now, and he trusted them. So, the little one wants to be useful to her home too. Ellie wasn't sure if telling the Earl would even help, but it was all she could do right now, and Kentrail thanked her. Then, he asked her to describe the knight, and the little one told him everything. Later that evening, the Earl kept thinking back to the day of the attempt. At first, he thought he was the target, but the arrow was definitely headed straight for Marie, and he needed to know why her life might be in danger. Kentrail couldn't shake these thoughts, replaying other moments in his head, like when Marie declared they'd protect Brielle, no matter what. Questions were piling up, but the Count was sure Marie wasn't the type to hurt the kid. They both promised to protect his nephew after all. Walking to the window, he saw her playing with Ellie and Brielle, and he trusted his nephew would definitely be safe. The next day, the Count finished his last dose of medicine. His treatment was over. He and Marie were in the garden, and she asked him what he wanted to talk about. He admitted that, thanks to Ellie, they'd caught a suspicious character, a knight. They locked him in the basement and were interrogating him, but the guy was tough. The Count also praised Ellie's intuition, saying she sensed something weird was going on. Marie agrees that kids are smarter than people give them credit for, but her face looked kinda sad. And the Count remembered his talk with Derek. Derek figured nobody messes with a regular nanny for no reason, so someone had to be behind it. Kentrail now recalled Marie mentioning an escort for Brielle, and since the culprit turned out to be a knight, he decided to hire Taylor. That guy's been serving in the county for a long time, so he's trustworthy. All the while, the Count was trying to figure out why Marie couldn't open up, and he thought maybe she didn't even realize what was happening. He guiltily admitted he would have been more careful if he knew she'd get hurt. She scraped her arm when she fell, but it was no big deal to her. Still, the Count felt guilty, and kneeling beside her, he put ointment on the cut himself. The girl was a little shocked by the concern, even though the Count was always kind. And when he finished, Marie just thanked him. He also asked her to talk to Ellie, knowing the little one was scared. He was still holding the nanny's hand, and she felt her face turning bright red. Gently pulling her hand away, Marie thanked him for his help and headed toward the house. And Kentrail froze, realizing he could still feel the touch of her skin on his palm. The girl went to her younger sister's room, where she was resting on the bed. She was hugging the rabbit Marie had sewn for her, and it was clear she was shaken up. Rolling onto her back, she admitted she knew that night. Said he'd always been good to her. Back in the day, he used to watch over Ellie and Barry a lot. Before they moved to the county, he was the one Marie trusted to look after the kids when she was running late from work. She'd also been wondering why she'd been left alone, even though she hadn't iced Brielle. But now she got it. She'd been walking on eggshells the whole time. Marie apologized to her sister for not paying her enough attention, but the little one shot back. I mean, she cooks, buys clothes, and sends Barry letters, right? Marie was blown away that her sister remembered practically every little thing. In the original story, Ellie didn't have it this good, because her sister was a real piece of work. Marie was suddenly overcome with emotion and gave her little sister a tight hug. Her original goal was to protect Brielle, but she ended up helping her sister and brother too. She wanted to protect those kids, but doing that would mean telling the Earl her whole story. But she was scared, terrified he wouldn't believe her, and would end up hating her. Kentrail fell asleep and dreamed he was running through a field with his older brother. He tripped over a bump and fell, and his brother reached out to help him up. To help him get back on his feet, even though the little guy insisted he could walk on his own. But his older brother wanted to carry him, so he gave him a piggyback ride. At some point, Kentrail realized it was a dream, but a really good one. He hugged his brother tighter and admitted how much he missed him. He also told him that Brielle was growing up just fine. And they kept going further and further, leaving the beaten path far behind. The next thing he knew, the Earl opened his eyes, and Brielle was sitting on his chest, patting him. The kid was so happy his uncle was awake, like he'd been waiting forever. Kentrail remembered hugging his brother tightly in the dream, and he hugged his nephew just as tight, so hard that the little guy started to complain. The dream had him choked up, and the little one wanted to know why he was crying. The Earl couldn't tell him everything. He just said he was really happy to see Brielle, and he confessed that he'd smacked his uncle because he thought he was having a nightmare. The Earl pretended it hurt, and the little guy offered to blow on it to make it better. After that little bit of healing, Kentrail picked up his nephew and thanked him. Later on, the Earl decided to show the nanny and the kids his piano skills. Plus, it was a good way to kill the kids' boredom. See, the nanny couldn't let them go outside because of the potential danger. When the Earl finished, The little ones started praising his talent and happily applauded him. Kentrail was just glad they liked it. He also noticed how much Marie enjoyed his playing. And then Brielle asked if the nanny could play the piano. She remembered learning children's songs in kindergarten because she wanted to play them herself. But it'd be kinda sus if she admitted she could play an instrument like that. Still, she confessed that she could, and Brielle was a little surprised. So, the Count promised to teach both those little tykes how to tickle the ivories. The girl had this weird look on her face after he said that, though. Then Cantriel plopped her and his nephew down at the piano. The little one just couldn't believe she could actually learn to play, and Marie was just over the moon seeing the kids so happy. Late that night, the Count, with his knight, met up with Derek again. He walked right up and started grilling him about what he'd dug up. And Derek reported back that the people the Count suspected benefited the most from Brielle's parents' demise. Then Derek wondered if they'd gotten anything out of the perp. The Count figures it's a dead end, 'cause the guy won't even squeak. But he did share that they found a letter at his place. Thing is, it's encrypted, so we don't know exactly what it says yet. Looks like Derek's gotta keep digging into this. And he asked if the Earl had given any thought to what they discussed recently. Scarface over here doubts that Nanny Marie is trustworthy, but the Earl's totally convinced the girl can be trusted. He gets Derek's concerns, but if the nanny wanted to, she would have already messed with Brielle. Besides, she looks after that kid like he was her own flesh and blood. Although the Earl admits, she is suspiciously overprotective of Brielle. Derek couldn't go against his lord's word, and promised to get the job done. The Count's last request was for him to look after Marie, should anything happen to him. And not just the girl herself, but her family too. The loyal servant promised to fulfill the request, no matter what. The day arrived for Barry to come home, and the sisters went out to meet him. Ellie was super excited for him to arrive. She'd even been circling and counting the days on the calendar. Today was Barry's first day of vacation, and soon they saw his carriage. A friend was supposed to come with him, and Marie told her sister to be on her best behavior. It was obvious, since as kids grow up, they start bringing friends around. The kids were bored anyway, so new people would make things more fun. Ellie was at the carriage door in a flash when her brother peeked out. They were both stoked to see each other, and immediately went in for a hug. Then, another dude popped out of the carriage. Barry introduced him as his friend, Cease Keylor. Mari suddenly flinched. That name rang a bell. And not just any bell, because Cease Keylor is the main character of the novel. His hair shimmered in the sun like strands of pure silver. And he wasn't just handsome, he had a face sculpted by the gods themselves. And this novel's protagonist was the one who, according to the story, took out the villain Kentrail. Later, Taylor overheard Cease bragging about his accomplishments, while a disgruntled Brielle sat on his arm. The knight already knew this guy was capable, just by looking at his hand. He couldn't figure out why the nanny was acting so cagey around the guest. This whole kingdom where all this is going down, it's brand new. A lot of the noble families still haven't even met each other yet. Same goes for the Kaler family. They're all knights, through and through. And now, Taylor's decided to take Brielle to the Earl, even though he wanted to check out the guests. Meanwhile, Marie offered the guests a drink, figuring they were beat after traveling. As she poured, she couldn't believe Cease was actually Barry's friend. But in the original timeline, her brother never even had a shot at wielding a sword. Just then, Kaler piped up, asking where the Earl was. He wanted to thank the guy for inviting him over. Marie explained that the Earl was currently working, and suggested the guests relax for the time being. Remembering the novel's plot, she wasn't sure if these two should even be meeting. A little later, Brielle snuck out to the treehouse in the garden, sulking up a storm. He was pissed at everyone because they wouldn't let him greet the guests. I mean, they were met and talked to without him even being there. Just then, Taylor approached and asked if he could come up to see the young master. But the kid forbade him from climbing up, still fuming that he wasn't allowed to play with Barry. He noticed Barry had gotten so tall already, and he wished he could hurry up and grow too. Brielle was thinking he'd been sent away because he wasn't big enough yet. Marie also came over to the tree and saw the little guy's legs hanging down sadly. She knew he was pissed, but the whole thing just struck her as hilarious. Taylor confirmed Brielle was fuming too, said he managed to catch a few choice words. That's when the nanny had a freaking brilliant idea. A minute later, the kid noticed it got real quiet and even thought about climbing down to check it out. But he was still stewing, so he decided to leave it be, and then he heard a rustling sound. He looked up and saw Mari already perched on a branch right next to the treehouse. She confessed that when she was a kid, she was a total tree-climbing ninja. She was grinning, and Brielle got even more ticked off, 'cause he was still sulking. But the nanny explained that a stranger had arrived, so they needed to be careful. She wanted to say that the kid looked super cute at that moment, but knew he'd just get all huffy again. She was trying so hard not to laugh. She didn't even realize she was losing her balance. 1 second later, she slipped and went tumbling down, and Brielle totally freaked out. But the Count was right there, and managed to catch her in his arms before she hit the ground. Then, he started scolding Marie for not listening to him and being more careful. All the while, he was worried if she'd gotten hurt, but she assured him she was fine. The next thing you know, Taylor came running up, scared out of his mind, and even Brielle decided to come down. The Count sent the knight to help the little one get down safely, and Mari apologized for being clumsy and scaring everyone like that. The Count didn't keep yelling at her, and the little kid was just curious where he'd come from. Kentrail saw Marie clumsily climbing the tree from the window and got worried. It's pretty sturdy, but the nanny's not exactly an athlete. After that, the little dude wanted to meet the guests who arrived today. The Earl was cool with saying hello, especially since it was almost lunchtime. A little later, Brielle went to see Ellie, who was totally absorbed in a book, and he started asking if it was really Marie's birthday tomorrow. When she confirmed it, he asked what she was getting his sister. Ellie got her a hat, and the little guy started whining that he hadn't gotten anything. He didn't just want to say happy birthday, since she takes such good care of him. Right then, the Earl walked in, and Brielle immediately ran to him. He shouted, asking if he knew that it was Marie's birthday tomorrow. And then, with those puppy dog eyes, he confessed he wanted to get her something. Kentrail and Ellie knew they had to step in and help, so the Earl suggested buying her something. The next day, Marie was greeted with congratulations. Her sister and brother immediately shoved gift boxes at her, but Brielle was still fumbling around. Then, he handed her a jewelry box, admitting he picked it out himself when he went shopping with his uncle. The little dude looked so stoked he could actually give her something. Then, behind him, Taylor admitted Brielle couldn't make up his mind, so the Earl practically bought the whole store. There were so many gifts. Marie didn't know when she'd ever get around to using them all. Then, the Earl gave her a dream catcher, figuring she wasn't into accessories since she never wears her brooch, and she explained she was just worried the kids might get hurt by the sharp pin on it. She dug this gift too, and thanked the Count for it. He even blushed, and Ellie started begging to see her present. Opening the box, Marie thought the hat was cool, just like all the other gifts. Then, she thanked everyone for the birthday wishes, and she gave Brielle a peck on the cheek, promising she'd totally use his gift. The little dude was stoked she liked it and gave her a peck back. Back in her old life, Marie's parents were always at each other's throats. They only got hitched because of her, and she can't even remember the last time they celebrated her birthday. But now, they even got her a strawberry cake with a candle, and she was super happy to be surrounded by so many awesome people. Later, she tried on a hat, and it looked amazing on her. It was perfect for meeting up with someone. Ellie started asking who it was, and her sister said it was just a friend. The little one still didn't get why she had to dress up so fancy for a friend, but Marie wanted to get out, especially now that the bad guy was caught. She went to meet with Erin, Brielle's former nanny. That woman's kid had grown up a lot too. It had been a whole year since she left, and she asked how Brielle was doing. Marie happily admitted that he was looking more and more like the Earl. Erin noticed Marie was all dressed up and guessed she was going on a date later, and she explained it was a gift from her sister. That's why she was wearing the hat. She could hang out till late since the kid was with the maid. That's when Marie spotted Yudges, the tutor, at the next table. He was sitting there alone, and he was just as surprised to see the nanny there. She hadn't gotten a chance to say goodbye when he quit, and realized he lived nearby. Then she introduced him to Erin, and Erin invited him to have lunch with them. The guy was shy, figured the two ladies were having a good time on their own, but they insisted, and Yudges agreed to join them. He also mentioned that Marie looked amazing today, and Erin noticed them hitting it off, so she decided to leave them alone for a few minutes. Later, when Brielle couldn't find Marie, he went to Ellie to ask where she was. Ellie was reading in the library, where the Count also worked and was having tea. That's when Ellie blurted out that Marie went on a date, and Kentrail almost choked. After all, she only said she was going for a walk, and he felt a twinge of jealousy. Then, he started asking who with, and he wasn't the only one. Brielle was clearly unhappy too. But Ellie, without looking up from her book, said she didn't know anything else. And then the little kid angrily snatched the book right out of her hands. And throwing it aside, he started yelling that Marie was only for him. Ellie started explaining that the nanny also needed to find her own happiness, and she couldn't take care of Brielle forever. Then the Count started asking questions, and the girl admitted that Marie was going to meet a close friend. Hearing about a close friend, Kentrail felt like he was about to lose his damn mind. But Ellie, who was watching him, started to figure out what was going on. After a while, Taylor came to the Earl and reported that he'd found her. Marie was at a restaurant near the market, but there's a lot of security there. Seemed like nothing to worry about. But the Earl was clearly waiting for more details, and when Taylor reported that the nanny was there with a guy, Kentrail turned purple with jealousy. But he immediately pulled himself together, so as not to give himself away, and just sent the night. The Earl berated himself for not being able to control his emotions, but he knew he should congratulate Marie if she met someone she liked. That would be the right thing to do. But right now, he was a total mess of conflicting feelings, and that girl kept popping into his head more and more. The Earl knew he didn't want to lose her or let her go. It was tearing him up inside. But he was scared that Marie might not feel the same way about him. He figured she might be into someone else, and the thought was killing him. He glanced out the window and saw her come back, laughing with the butler. And the Earl tortured himself, thinking she was having a great time on a date. On the way to the house, Marie told the butler she was just out for a walk. Just then, Brielle rushed up to her, grilling her about whether she really had a date. Ellie told him that, and the nanny understood why he was so bummed out. Then she explained she'd gone to meet his former nanny, Erin. There's no way she'd abandon such a sweet little guy, and he started to calm down. Marie, it clicked that Ellie had twisted her words, and then it hit her. The Count could have heard it too. She went after him, But he was playing busy and trying to bail. Even when she started telling him about Brielle's lesson, he just gave her the cold shoulder. And Marie realized Kentrail had overheard something and was seriously bummed out. The girl felt like she messed up, and the kids were totally watching her the whole time. They figured Marie was into the Count, or he wouldn't be so worked up. Barry was still on the fence, so Ellie smacked him. She sees everything after all, and it ticks her off that her brother doesn't believe her, when even the Count was more trusting when she talked about what happened. Makes sense, considering we're talking about the guy who fired the arrow. Barry knew Ellie must have been terrified back then too, but she argued back. She didn't want to show she was scared, especially since they caught that creep pretty quick. But those feelings are still coming back to her now, and her brother offered to stay here with her instead of going back to the academy. A few days later, Marie noticed the Earl was still avoiding her. He wasn't even going out on the balcony like he usually did, and she realized he must have overheard the date and gotten upset. But she immediately told herself that if he cared, he would have just asked. She wanted to talk about it, but she was afraid the reason was something else, and she'd be embarrassed. And she figured it was just her imagination. Plus, it was dumb to think that way about a guy who's already taken. Suddenly, Marie heard a rustling sound and realized someone was there. She got spooked and decided to leave, especially since she'd already picked enough flowers. And as she walked, she kept feeling like someone was following her. Then, out of nowhere, she spotted a note on the bench that said, "Traitor." That freaked her out, because it meant they might have the wrong guy. That note wasn't there a minute ago, so there's still a dangerous person in the mansion. For Marie, this is the final warning. Brielle could be in danger at any moment. Now, no matter how much the Earl trusts her, she has to tell him the truth. Kentrail was, as usual, working late in his study. When Marie knocked, asking in a timid voice if she could come in, her voice instantly dredged up his last memories of her. He told her to come back later if it wasn't important. He still couldn't face her, but Marie came in anyway. The Earl saw she looked down and got worried. He went to her, asking if she was sick or if something happened to the kids, but that wasn't it. And Marie held out a note to him. Then she said someone left it for her on a bench in the garden, and that what was written in the note had everything to do with her. The Earl figured if she'd betrayed him, she wouldn't be getting threatening notes, but suspicions arose that she was in league with those threatening their family. Not knowing where to begin, she asked if the Earl thought she was odd. After all, he keeps a close eye on everything concerning the young master. The girl's hands were shaking like crazy, but she kept going. He had to be getting the vibe that the nanny had suddenly become a different person. And Kentrail's answer right now was super important to what he needed to know. The Earl remembered reading her resume and immediately agreeing to hire her as a nanny. But then he started noticing that Brielle wouldn't stop crying around her. He even wondered if he should change his mind. But one fine day, Brielle smiled at this girl. From that day on, that kid never stopped smiling. And as time went on, the Count figured his troubles were over. But at the same time, he could tell that the nanny was way different than she used to be. And now he had to admit, he was starting to wonder if he'd hired the wrong person. Then, in a shaky voice, Marie told him this crazy story about a world from a book where the nanny was hired to take out Brielle, but someone else took over her body. Now, the Count needed to know why she was originally ordered to off Brielle, but the book's plot only kicked in after that went down, and she had no clue who was pulling the strings. She also didn't know how to explain why she never finished the novel. Marie was shaking like a leaf, and the Count felt a wave of sympathy for her. He held her gently and asked her not to say any more if it was too much to bear. Kentrail understood this newcomer was really going through it, and reassured her that everything was all right. A bigger tear rolled down Mari's cheek when he thanked her for saving him and Brielle. Still, she was scared the Count hated her, since that other guy tried to off the kid. But he was sure, if she wanted to hurt him, she wouldn't have spilled her guts like this. Her story was hard to swallow, but her body, shaking like a leaf, proved it was the real deal. The Count asked for her real name, and she told him it was Jin Heron. After that, Kentrail wiped away her tear and told her to stop being such a crybaby. He was also curious if she missed anyone from her past life, and if there were people she wished she could see right now. All that flashed through her mind were her parents, always too busy for her, and the faces of her friends were blurry memories, 'cause they barely hung out. But if she ever ran into them, she'd want to catch up, you know? She also wished she could take one last trip with her mom before the accident. Bursting into tears again, she collapsed against the Count's chest, confessing she missed everything. Eventually, she passed out from all the stress, and they carried her to her room. She's been out for 3 days now, and Ellie's been right by her side, refusing to even catch some Z's. Her brother's worried sick that the little one's gonna get sick herself. She needs sleep. He promised to bring her something, then told her to go get some shut-eye. The girl agreed, but she still felt totally wrecked. She remembered that her sister had started acting all kinds of weird. She even claimed she could play the piano, even though she never could before. Plus, she stopped wearing the brooch that a special someone gave her. But the biggest thing was, this girl started smiling every time she saw Ellie, and when asked why she wasn't wearing the brooch, she'd say she didn't want anyone to get hurt. And she kept saying how much she loved her brother, her sister, and Brielle. After hearing that, Ellie figured it was a load of bull, 'cause Marie couldn't stand them. To her, her brother and sister were always just a way to make a buck. and the girl couldn't figure out why Marie was lying and faking being happy. She had no clue what was going on, but she decided to play it cool, because she liked the changes, and she didn't want to feel abandoned. Plus, her sister's smile didn't seem fake anymore. Marie wasn't yelling at Ellie anymore, and her eyes looked at her with kindness. The little girl even thought it wasn't her sister anymore, but an angel had come down from heaven and taken her place. Time flew by, and Ellie stopped wondering about all that. Now Marie's part of her family and her beloved older sister, and she didn't think about any of it until Marie passed out. The girl remembered that her sister had changed and was afraid she might leave her at any moment. So, she sat by her bed almost all the time, holding her hand and praying that she wouldn't leave her. One day, the Earl happened to overhear the little one's sad words by her sister's side, and he remembered how happy he was as a kid with his brother. He came to check on the nanny too, but didn't go in, just turned around and left. He headed to another spot, where he was supposed to meet Derek. Derek noticed the mansion felt weird now and asked what was up. Kentrail explained that the nanny fainted and hasn't gotten out of bed for days. Then, he asked for an update on the tasks he'd assigned him. Derek reported that everything was going great, which pleased the Earl, because they can't afford to wait any longer for the enemy to make a move. Little Brielle also came to visit Marie, thinking she was sick. He got sad, because everyone he loves leaves him, just like Mom and Dad. Taylor, the guy who came with him, told him not to say stuff like that, but he knew the gossip had already gotten to the kid. He explained that Marie's sickness had absolutely nothing to do with the little master. It's not his fault, so the kid needs to ditch those dumb thoughts. The boy tried to calm down, but he was still bummed out, and Taylor helped him climb onto the bed, so he could be closer to the nanny. Brielle didn't freak out. He just carefully sat down next to him and opened his journal. He didn't want to forget what he wanted to tell Marie, so he made notes and drawings. His uncle said the nanny would be okay, but the kid could tell he was lying by how shaky he was, and people around are saying that something fishy is going on and that the house is in danger. Everyone was whispering so the kid wouldn't hear, 'cause he's still just a baby. He really wants to help, but all he can do right now is learn, and that's bumming him out. Brielle snuggled up to Marie, begging her to wake up soon, because he's miserable without her. But the girl just kept lying there, not moving or opening her eyes. The little guy was already supposed to leave, but he asked to stay a bit longer. Taylor explained that Marie needed to rest, and the little one did too. He agreed, but he was already itching to come back tomorrow. He needs to get to his room now so he can get a good night's sleep. Taylor was worried the little guy would be traumatized, and he was praying himself that the nanny would wake up soon. Then, 5 days after she passed out, Marie finally opened her eyes. Brielle rushed to her right away, not even thinking about tripping and falling. He was yelling so loud, but now his eyes were filled with happy tears. Soon the Count and Ellie showed up, and they were all super relieved that Marie had woken up. After a while, the girl went out to the garden, where the Count caught up with her almost immediately. He explained that Brielle was looking for her, and also reminded her that he'd asked her to get more rest. Marie was feeling suffocated, being stuck in her room all the time, so she came out for some fresh air. She's not going far, though. She remembers the danger hasn't passed yet. Besides, Derek's guarding this area, so she feels safe. Suddenly, the girl declared that the Count was the one who needed more rest. And touching his cheeks, she pointed out how much weight he'd lost. But she started to suspect that he was just really, really worried. Kentrail admitted it was true. She'd passed out right after things went south between them, and he was scared he'd never get to tell her what he wanted to say. In an instant, Mari got serious, thinking this was going to be some kind of confession. But the Count said he'd understand if she decided to leave, now that she'd found someone she liked. Realizing he was still hung up on her date, Mari assured him she'd been meeting with Aaron, and that day, she'd just worn the hat Ellie gave her. The Count then realized it was all just a big misunderstanding. Still, he had a hard time believing Marie was hanging out with Aaron. Now he felt like a total idiot, but changed the subject, asking Marie to stay inside for a bit. As for the former nanny, he suggested sticking to letters for now. Kentrail was about to leave, and Marie turned away, trying to hide her blush. The Count was beet red himself, but he tried to quickly compose himself. Then, he walked over to the nanny and draped his coat over her shoulders. He was worried she wasn't fully recovered and might catch a cold. As for himself, he assured her that he only looked thin, but he was in great health. The girl gave him a sweet smile, appreciating his concern, and she wanted to say something back. Just then, they heard Brielle's clear voice, calling for the nanny. The two adults immediately took a step back from each other, and the Count reminded her that the little one had been looking for her for a while, and asked her to go to him quickly, because the kid was really worried after she passed out. Later, Jaden stopped by to see Marie because he wanted to give her a gift. He'd put together a little bag of all the tastiest candies, hoping she'd feel better soon. Plus, it was his way of saying thanks for making him that doll the other day. Then Brielle showed up with pudding, and you could tell the boys were totally competing for the nanny's attention. The little dude figured something sweet would help her bounce back faster. He even fed Marie with a spoon, and she admitted it was seriously delicious. She'd heard a rumor that Jaden had gotten into it with his sister, Sia, and he started making excuses, saying she'd swiped his favorite toy. Brielle chimed in, saying he'd give his sister anything she wanted. But when Jaden asked if he'd give up his teddy bear, He totally fibbed and said he'd give that up too. Meanwhile, the Earl was chatting with Jake, who was genuinely worried if everything was all right. He'd heard security at the residence had been seriously beefed up recently. He knew something was up and offered his help if needed. Baron Jake was an old friend and loyal ally, but the Earl didn't want to drag him into this mess, because he's a father too, and Kentrail insisted everything was fine. Jake thought he was being stubborn, but knowing his friend wouldn't spill the beans right now, he just asked him to let him know if he needed anything at all. And he thanked him, knowing Jake could take care of Brielle if anything went south. A lot was still unclear, but the list of suspects was slowly getting smaller, and there's one person who stood to gain the most from Brielle's parents' demise. This is Kevrin, the king's father-in-law and the queen's dad, here to visit his daughter and son-in-law. The king, always wearing that damn smile, greeted him with a little too much cheer. Kevrin was here to drop some juicy news on his son-in-law. He'd heard whispers that something went down at the chancellor's mansion. Turns out the king already knew, but he noticed the worried look on his father-in-law's face. And he realized this news really got under Kevrin's skin. But Kevrin insisted he was just worried about his nephew's well-being. The king didn't argue, and with a hint of sarcasm, he pointed out that he was the one who exiled that nephew to save his own skin. He knows his political weaknesses, and he's even admitting them out loud. Backing the king on this means drawing a line in the sand with the chancellor. But criticizing his decision is completely off the table, no matter what. The silence hung heavy. Then the queen jumped into the conversation. She asked if Kentrail and Brielle were doing okay. But she clammed up real quick, feeling the king's icy glare on her. He's convinced she already knows everything and is just turning a blind eye to help her dad. The queen started to protest, but the king shut her down fast. Because seeing them together again, he realized they really were two of a kind. The atmosphere started getting thick. Even the king's smile vanished. Kevrin decided to bail, saying he had urgent business, and the king told his wife to leave too. Her Majesty just walked towards the exit in silence, and as she passed her father, he touched her shoulder to show his quiet support. The servants whispered that someone had worked hard to get here, and now it was over so fast, and they felt sorry for the queen. Barry had already made it back to the academy by this point. Sis was happy to see him. He'd headed over there earlier. He'd heard there was some kind of incident at the Earl's place, and it was a total mess. Barry explained it wasn't just an incident, but a real problem, and now he's worried about having to leave his sisters behind. A few days before heading to the academy, Barry went to see the Earl. To say he doesn't want to go back there? Kentrail already knew that. He knows the kid ain't over what happened to his sister at the mansion. Marie wasn't feeling too hot back then, and Barry asked to stay here for a year. He was also worried about Ellie, but the Earl assured him she's tougher than she looks, so Barry needs to head to the academy, become a knight, and then protect his sisters. What's more, Kentrail promised he'd take care of them while he's studying. The kid understood that his sisters also want him to finish his education. And he came back, and Sis was stoked, because he was bored out of his skull here alone. He even admitted he wishes all the vacations were shorter. Sis is a top student, third in the rankings, and could graduate early. Nah, he wasn't about to do that, because things would just get messier down the line. He'd have to start worrying about who takes over, and he's happy with how things are right now. Barry was surprised, because Sis is the second son, so all that shouldn't even matter. And he'd be stoked to see his buddy killing it as a student. Then he bragged he'd crush him this year, and Sis didn't even argue. Truth is, Kaylor just saw the guy as sincere, maybe a little too innocent. At first, he figured Barry was some fallen noble trying to claw his way back up. But he saw that he just wants to get strong quick, so he can protect the people he cares about. Then, when Kaylor visited the Count's place, he suddenly felt a pang of envy. Meanwhile, finding a decent tutor after ditching Yujas became a real headache for Brielle. That's why the kid had some serious gaps in his knowledge. So Marie tried teaching him at least how to write, but it was tough going. Brielle couldn't focus and whined that he wasn't interested in writing dictation. He wanted to play chess, but the nanny laid down the law, 10 sentences first. The kids hadn't left the mansion in months, but they always found something to do. Brielle reluctantly scribbled the lines on the paper, and the nanny let him go play. Meanwhile, Marie was stressing, not knowing what to do about Ellie's education. I mean, she used to go to school with all the neighborhood kids, until they were all told they couldn't go outside anymore. Before long, Ellie announced she wanted to be a teacher when she grew up. Marie was a little surprised, but the girl had been thinking about this for a while now. I mean, she's been watching the young master all the time. It's made her start taking an interest in kids younger than her. Ellie loves kids and thinks she'd be good at taking care of them. Plus, watching Brielle get tutored by her sister makes her want to try it too. And she knows she'll have to study hard to be smart enough for it, obviously. Ellie even talked to Marie about maybe working as a maid for a bit. They're taking on apprentices her age right now, and she could help bring some money home, even though Marie just wants her sister to do what makes her happy. Ellie gets that the Earl's been taking care of them, but they gotta think about the future too. Just as Kentrail walked into the room, he happened to overhear their conversation, and he asked who told Ellie that they needed to worry about stuff like that. He came in because he noticed the light was on, even though it was bedtime, and Marie explained that she'd come to double-check everything before turning in. Ellie felt embarrassed when the Count appeared and snuggled close to her sister. He sat down next to her and said that if she ever wanted to stay here forever, it wouldn't be a problem, since they were valued friends of Brielle. The Count wondered why they were talking about the maids, and Marie explained that Ellie actually wants to become a teacher. Kentrail thought that was a fantastic idea. He was sure the girl could do it. He sees her as a kind and smart person, and Ellie perked up a bit after hearing that. But then Marie was surprised when the Earl promised to find a tutor for the little one. The sisters exchanged puzzled glances, and Ellie timidly said that the Earl had already done so much for them. Then she confessed that she wanted to find a way to become a governess without a tutor. The Earl didn't argue, just asked them to let him know if they needed his help. Ellie was happy, but Marie was still surprised, because it was the first time she'd heard about her sister's dream. She hadn't even noticed how Ellie had grown up and was already thinking about the future. When she talked about this with the Earl, he admitted that Brielle still seemed like he was born just yesterday to him too. Like it was just yesterday he was running away from them, not wanting to change diapers. The kids were growing up so fast, and Marie couldn't agree more. Then, Kentrail confessed he'd always be grateful to her for being such an amazing person, and she shouldn't feel like she owes him anything. Her family totally earned this. Marie blushed crimson, totally flustered, and turned away so the Count wouldn't notice. Then, he suddenly asked if she had a dream of her own. She'd always wanted to take care of kids like Ellie, but she couldn't become a kindergarten teacher, so she worked at the orphanage instead. But in a way, her dream came true, and she was happy about it. Now Marie was thinking about what she'd do next. Right now, all she wants is for the kids to grow up healthy and safe. And the Earl mentioned she still had time to think things over while the kids grew up. After that, they said goodnight and went their separate ways to bed. The Earl kept thinking how he wished he could support Marie in chasing her dreams, whatever they might be. Time passed, and winter arrived, blanketing the county in snow. Marie stepped outside, while Ellie and Brielle should already have been in class. She knew those two were probably itching to get out of there. Brielle really couldn't wait for class to end, worried the snow would melt. Ellie had already turned in her worksheet with the problem solved, but the Earl asked her to think it through again. A little later, Marie brought some warm cocoa to cheer the kids up. She even made a cup for Kentrail. The Earl decided to dedicate himself to teaching the kids, seeing as the search for the culprit was going nowhere. He bragged that Ellie was making great progress, 'cause she's sharp and driven. Marie suddenly looked at her sister with this kind of worried expression, like she was concerned. And the Earl realized it was 'cause she'd been sneaking out, even though he'd asked her not to. To distract Marie, he started bragging about how he was top of his class, so Ellie was better off learning from him. A little while later, Brielle also grumbled that he was all done too. And Kentrail praised both kids for putting in such good effort. The little ones just stared at the adults with these pleading eyes. Their request was clear without a word, and the Earl gave them permission to go play. The kids bolted right away, and Marie barely had time to yell for them to bundle up. And she was worried that it was slippery out, and they might fall. Then she felt the Earl's hand on her shoulder, telling her not to worry. It was the first snow of the year, and he suggested they go take a look at it. The girl agreed. She actually liked the idea, but she jumped when the butler suddenly appeared in the study. He was holding outerwear and asked the Earl to bundle up, because it was freezing outside. Kentrail took the fur wrap and put it around Marie's shoulders. Her health was way more important to him, and she blushed again. Then she noticed the butler was still standing there. He figured something like this would happen, so he got another wrap ready. Marie stormed out of the office, thinking the Count was laying it on a little thick with the maid. When they both finally stepped outside into the courtyard, kids were already running wild. Snow was still falling, dusting their shoulders. The first snowfall since Marie arrived. That's when she first held Brielle, who couldn't even walk back then. And now that little kid's running around like a maniac. And the Count, who everyone says is a real hard case, is walking right beside her, matching her pace. Marie noticed he kept glancing at her, like he was trying to figure something out. He admitted he had something he wanted to tell her, and they locked eyes. Just then, a snowball came flying at them, and the Count barely saw it in time. That snowball was headed straight for Marie. Kentrail managed to deflect it, taking the hit on his elbow, and the girl got spooked. Turns out, Brielle was launching those things and demanding his uncle do it too. Ellie freaked, thinking they'd be in deep trouble, and started pulling the little guy away. The adults figured out what was going on and started cracking up. The Earl, saying they'd talk later, headed over to his nephew. Marie didn't think some talking was worth worrying about. Right now, the kids' health and safety were what mattered most. Later, she decided to put on a puppet show for the kids. Brielle had no idea what that was, and he was super curious. Once they gave him a quick explanation, he stared intently at the little stage. And when the curtains went up, there was Kentrail, decked out like a knight in shining armor. Not long before that, the Earl had called the nanny over and reminded her about making flashcards for Brielle. He knew kids got bored doing the same old thing all the time, so he suggested putting on a show for the little ones, something he used to love as a kid himself. The nanny was digging the idea, and now they needed to get the stage ready. She never would have thought of it herself, since the novel barely touched on the Earl's childhood, and she promised to help out, hoping he'd handle most of the prep work. Then, Marie asked if the Earl knew how to play any other instruments, but the Earl realized she was a total pro on the piano herself, He knew she was playing coy when she said she wasn't that good. He could see it all over her face. And she admitted that, back in her world, people knew how to play all sorts of instruments. She even promised to play something next time, if the Count wanted her to. So now, they'd put together a puppet show, with characters they'd drawn themselves. The little kids were totally captivated. It was a story about a knight and a dragon. The story said that if you gave a dragon flowers, your wish might come true. And the knight, full of hope and courage, set out to try his luck. The Count mostly worked the paper puppets and did all the voices. And Marie sat next to the kids, enjoying the show herself. By the time the play was over, the little ones were sound asleep. The butler picked up Brielle, who was drooling a little, still half asleep. So, I figured I'd take him up to his room and tuck him into bed. And Taylor volunteered to look after Ellie, so Marie handed her over. Once everyone cleared out, the Count and the Nanny were stoked it went so well. The kids were totally fascinated, 'cause dragons are like pure magic. Suddenly, Marie got curious about whether dragons even exist. She thought they were just legends, but the Count claimed they were around way back when. She still wasn't buying it. Though she pictured them being kinda like a phoenix, the Count hadn't heard of a phoenix and didn't get what she was on about. And while tidying up the toys, she asked the Count to give her the full story next time. Just then, Kentrail piped up and said not to clean up yet, 'cause there's one more scene to go. He grabbed the knight figurine, while Marie held the princess. The Count figured the Nanny was probably bored stiff out here in the sticks too. Then he asked her to take a seat, and he went backstage. And using the puppets, he continued the story of how the knight was captivated by the princess's beauty. Marie was floored, realizing the Count was acting out a romance. She got so into it, she was practically buzzing with anticipation. The Count himself looked totally flustered, like he was embarrassed. But the girl was loving it. She even shed a happy tear. The story went on, about how the princess didn't understand the knight's feelings, because thanks to her, he was changing every day and getting better all the time. And he's got no clue if she even likes him back, or if he matters to her at all. But after everything that's happened, he's come to one conclusion. Just then, Marie felt her heart start pounding in her chest. The Count, still playing, but staring right at her, said he was falling for her. Not sure who he was talking to, Marie swallowed hard, trying to keep it together. It felt like Kentrail was talking to her now, not just acting out the scene. I mean, who wouldn't fall for a guy like that? But he was way out of her league. Then there was this pause, like it was planned or something. Then the Count said again, all meaningful like, that he could only be happy with her. And if those words were meant for Marie, she doubted she could ever make him happy. She told the Count she really enjoyed the play, but she also figured Ellie and Brielle would have a better future without her. After a while, Kentrail went back to the palace to resume his duties as Chancellor. He met with the king, who was happy the Count was back in service. He just reminded him that as His Majesty's loyal servant, he had no other choice. The king got curious and asked if Kentrail had sorted out his personal affairs during his leave. And the Count handed him a document confirming he'd been dealing with some urgent matters. His Majesty noticed the young man next to the Chancellor and asked who he was. The commoner kid, Vidal, was super nervous, but bowed to the king. When the Count invited him, he didn't think he was good enough to visit places like this, but he was acting Chancellor while the Count was away. And His Majesty was pleased to finally meet the guy. He liked how the kid worked and thought he deserved a reward. And he decided to hand over all the documents right away, even though the Count asked him to double-check them one more time. He was even surprised, realizing that the king always handled documents like that. But he couldn't doubt the guy he himself had chosen, right? With those words, Kentrail sensed something fishy, but stayed quiet. He just asked to be the one to deliver Vidal's reward. The Count announced that he wanted to give the young man a noble title. Vidal himself immediately freaked out at that statement, fearing the king's wrath. And someone else pointed out that the Earl's choice caused some unpleasant chatter. But the Chancellor thinks it's just gossip. He wants to give the people what they deserve. And Vidal's the guy he can trust with important stuff while he's away. He's not planning on disappearing again anytime soon. Just saying who he trusts in the palace. The king wasn't thrilled with the idea of turning a commoner into an aristocrat, but the royal power's still shaky, since the system's not fully set up yet. Even when Kentrail was made Chancellor, the nobles put up a lot of resistance. And the king needs talent, not just blue bloods right now, so he's gotta agree. If the Earl has to be away in the future, he needs a capable guy by his side. Plus, by gradually giving people noble titles, the king will show that the central government is strong. It's not a high-profile title, so the nobles won't put up a fight. After hearing the Earl's arguments, His Majesty promised to consider it. A little later, as Kentrail was heading home, Vidal ran up to him, but the Earl stopped him and signaled for him to leave him be. He then climbed into the carriage, where Derek already was, saying the preparations were complete. That pleased the Earl, and he apologized again for making him do this. Then, he shared his conversation with the king about Vidal, believing he'd be accepted, especially since His Majesty thinks Kentrail is on his side. And soon it should be announced that the Queen's palace is recruiting new maids and servants. Derek was ordered to send the prepared personnel in time for that. The Count suspected the Queen benefited from the deaths of her parents and brother. He wasn't sure if Brielle was a target yet, but it might be connected to the case where her parents were framed. Derek's mission was to track down the people who got the boot during that incident. Finding the truth was crucial to the Count, but he also told the knight to watch his back. After that talk, Kentrail headed back to his estate, where a clearly worried Mari met him right on the street. She was freaking out because he was so late, but she didn't want to admit she was waiting up. So she claimed she was just there to help the butler with some chores. The girl felt kinda lame having to make up excuses like that, but she couldn't look the Count in the eye after that whole puppet show thing. But it wasn't polite to look away, so she asked him how his day went. Kentrail said everything was normal, pretty boring actually. Then Mari noticed he wasn't looking her in the eye either, but since she wasn't sure she could make them happy because of her position, she decided it was better to stay out of it. Besides, she'd already told him everything, and the Earl should take care of the rest. Still, Mari couldn't get little Brielle out of her head, so, stepping closer, she boldly took Kentrail's hand. And while he was trying to figure out what was going on, she declared that he was lying. She knew something had happened at the palace today, and she was worried. The Count and Brielle had become so important to her, she couldn't just stand by. No matter what happened, she wanted those two to find happiness. The next thing she knew, Marie realized she'd grabbed the Count's hand without asking. Letting go immediately, she explained that it was obvious when he was being dishonest too. Just like with Brielle, which made sense, since they're family. Turning her worried face away, Marie reminded him that she'd shared her pain with him, so he could talk to her too, if things ever got rough for him. And to get the Count to agree, she threatened to keep her own troubles to herself if she had any. Kentrail was just amazed at how observant this girl was. Still, he agreed to her request, and Marie smiled at him again. After that, the Earl admitted he'd been having a rough time lately. But he didn't get why the nanny was so worried. Since she's the one with the hardest job here, Marie just wanted the Earl to open up to her, so they could figure things out together. She wasn't trying to interfere, but Kentrail immediately shot that down. Because if it wasn't for her, things could have gotten way worse. Then the Earl confessed there was something he couldn't tell her in front of everyone. He suspects the Queen and his uncle are mixed up in this whole mess. Marie was lost in thought, because those people weren't a big deal in the original story. The Earl got caught during the palace raid, but it's not clear why they were targeting Brielle. Kentrail's parents were in an accident, and he was wrongly accused of some shady dealings. Uncle took over as head of the family, and the Queen got some of the power, and Marie started to suspect that Kevrin did it to grab control of the imperial family. If that's the way it is, then the king could be in on it too. The girl felt for him, since she'd never been threatened by her own family. But if Brielle's relatives are behind this, he's gonna be floored. All that was left was to hope they weren't involved. The Earl noticed Marie's worry and promised to protect her and the kids with everything he had. So she shouldn't stress so much, but the nanny's got a request too. She wants Kentrail to remember to take care of himself too. The Earl got a little flustered, but promised with a smile to do as she asked. Time passed, and Brielle raced to the nanny to show off his grades. He aced it with 100 points, and Marie gave him props for the awesome results. The little dude proudly declared he'd been working his tail off, and the nanny revealed he'd gotten a letter he'd been waiting for. This was the whole reason Brielle had busted his butt on that crummy test he hated. He was dying to read Barry's letters and write back to him. In the letter, Barry said the semester was almost over. He also asked how everyone was doing, and if Ellie was giving her big sister a hard time. He was worried about Marie, making sure she was eating right so she wouldn't pass out again. And he promised to be seriously ticked if she tried to hide it from him again. He wants Brielle to eat well, play and grow, and to really focus on those things. Next, Barry wrote that they have a huge tree on the training grounds. He spends almost all his free time under it. There's a tree like that at the mansion too, and he suggested Ellie and Brielle play under it. Then the guy admitted he probably wouldn't have started writing if those two hadn't pushed him. He had one semester left and couldn't wait to get back after the school year. The guy also asked to pass on his gratitude to the Earl and said he misses them all. One day, Ellie and Brielle were playing in the treehouse in the garden. Kentrail found them there and told them to come down so they could meet someone. He wanted to introduce a man who had sworn loyalty to him, Derek. Ellie froze, seeing his scary face, and Brielle hid behind her dress. But the Earl told them not to be afraid, because he'd trusted Derek for a long time, and he'd protect Brielle if anything ever happened to the Earl and Taylor. But the little guy just got even more freaked out, thinking his uncle was in trouble. Kentrail realized he hadn't phrased that right, so the nanny decided to step in. She explained that when there's an heir, you gotta be ready for anything life throws at you. That was supposed to calm the kid down, but he was still on edge. And the Earl promised that nothing bad was gonna happen to him, so there was nothing to worry about. Then Derek knelt down to Brielle, scaring him even more. But the little dude tried not to show it. The knight addressed him as the future head of the family and swore to serve him. The kid's the Earl's heir, so he's gonna be the head of the family one day. The nanny suggested we start calling Brielle that now, but he threw a fit. Marie just smiled, then turned to Derek and asked him to look after the young master, no matter what happens. The knight bowed politely, showing he wouldn't let her down. And now this guy didn't seem so scary to the little ones anymore. Even Brielle came closer to check out his huge hands. In the original story, Derek stayed by the Earl's side until the very end. And even though he looks intimidating at first, a guy like that's the best ally you can have. And while the kids were checking out their new bodyguard, the Earl turned to Marie, and he asked her to give him her attention because he needed to talk to her. He confessed that Derek had been investigating for a while now, and this time, he'd visited Brielle's mother's house. Marie realized he was talking about the house where her grandfather, Lord Peronia, lived. She was curious how those relatives were doing, and the Earl assured her everything was the same as always. But he wanted to know if there were any clues, and he got a letter that Aerie sent before she died. It was one of Brielle's mother's last letters, which Kentrail wanted to read together with Marie. He admitted he didn't have the guts to open it on his own. He trusts the nanny since she takes care of Brielle, and Aerie would have liked that. The girl picked up the envelope and agreed to open it together. Looks like this letter was sent after Brielle was born. In it, Aerie expressed how she finally understood what it meant to be a parent. She also wrote that she'd decided to name the boy Brielle, and how happy she was when he first opened his eyes. The Earl noticed that the letter's contents differed from his brother's diary entries, but he kept listening as his sister-in-law described wanting to see her son grow up. After those lines, Marie got so bummed out. Big tears started streaming down her face and landing on her dress. She confessed she was worried she wasn't good enough for Brielle. She almost dropped the letter from the stress, and the Earl told her not to think that way. He's convinced no one's better suited to protect his nephew than Marie. Touching her hand, the Count declared that she was exactly what his family needed. But Marie reminded him that he himself did everything he could to take care of Brielle. Kentrail didn't argue and asked her to open the last letter from Aerie. Surprisingly, it seemed very straightforward to Marie. Still, she didn't waste any time and opened the envelope. She started reading silently, and the Count figured it was something about Brielle again. But the nanny looked worried, and her breathing got faster. Then she explained that the letter described the young master's appearance. But even stranger, the description doesn't match reality. Brielle had a big birthmark on her left leg, and it was a weird shape. But the letter says that birthmark's on her right leg. To calm her rising anxiety, Marie figured Aerie just got it mixed up. But the Count's leaning more towards thinking the letter's a fake. That evening, back in her room, Marie couldn't stop thinking about it. She felt like she was getting worked up over nothing, even though the Count promised to look into it. Still, she was so worried that little Ellie noticed. But her big sister told her not to worry about it, and that everything was fine. The girl agreed not to make a fuss, but she had one request. She really wanted to go outside, and it sounded like a little kid's blackmail. Ellie just found out her friend's leaving, and she wanted to say goodbye. It suddenly hit Mari that her sister's been cooped up in this mansion for way too long. She texts her friends and all, but she wants to actually hang out with them, so she promised to ask the Count for permission to go out. Mari suddenly wondered why Ellie wasn't asking about it too. Why they're all forbidden from going outside, like it's some kind of crime. But Ellie seems to already know that someone's got it out for the Count's family. She also knows they caught the guy, but since they're still stuck inside, something else must be up. Mari was surprised and touched by how sharp her little sister was. Hugging the kid, she admitted she hadn't noticed how much she'd grown. The girl smiled and told her sister not to worry. The next day, Marie passed her sister's request on to the Earl, especially since she has a legit reason to go out. Ellie understands how serious things are. Kentrail didn't refuse, but he decided to assign Derek to watch over her. After all, that's partly why he called him here in the first place. The Earl trusts that guy more than anyone. Knowing he's always on the Earl's side, Marie hoped everything would be all right. Happy about this, she promised to tell Ellie the good news. Suddenly, Kentrail suggested the nanny take a break from work. They could go horseback riding, but Marie thought it'd be better to do that after they caught the perp. The Count was even happy about that, taking her words as a kind of promise. Then Marie asked if he'd managed to find out anything about the letter. The Count learned that a maid disappeared from Aerie's house during the accident. It's highly likely she swapped the letter, and they're already looking for this servant. Kentrail didn't want to give Marie too much to worry about, but he remembers her asking him to confide in her when things were tough. He's also sure that if something happens to him, she'll do everything she can for Brielle. That's why he wanted this girl to know everything about him. On the appointed day, Ellie and Derek went out to the city. Naturally, people kept turning around, noticing his awful scar. And get this, he was decked out head to toe in black, and the kid was like, "Dude, you gotta change." His outfit was screaming for attention, like he was some cult member who'd snatched a baby. Surprisingly, Ellie didn't get any pushback. The knight just promised he'd change. The little one was stoked, especially since she spotted a sweet store nearby. When Derek changed, he looked pretty damn good, like some kind of lord. He was a little self-conscious, but Ellie assured him everyone would dig his new look. Then they headed to the fountain, where she was supposed to meet a friend, but nobody was there yet, and Derek immediately sensed something was off. He straight up said meeting that friend today was going to be a problem. His tone was serious, and the girl got visibly freaked out. Derek just never figured they'd become a target so damn fast. He told Ellie that when he gave the signal, she had to bolt to the store, then through the gate and run to the county. The girl understood what she had to do, but she was worried about Derek. He knew he should stick with her, but he counted way more enemies than he liked. And you just don't send that many guys out just to grab a hostage. Trying to figure out who this nanny even is, Derek started counting down from 3. And on 3, Ellie was supposed to make a run for the store. But the knight suddenly grabbed her tight and took off with her, putting distance between them and this place. He carried her all the way to the store himself, just to make sure nothing happened to her on the way. Then he told her to do everything else she was supposed to do. Ellie didn't want to be a burden on Derek, and believed she could handle things. Now she needed to get to the county and rally some help. But no sooner had she taken a few steps than some dude showed up behind her and told her to freeze. His voice was menacing and echoed, sending chills down the little girl's spine. But she was more worried about her sister when suddenly this guy just dropped to the ground, out cold. Out of nowhere, Teacher Hughes showed up, the one who took care of the bad guy. Noticing the terrified girl, he asked if she was hurt. After that, he suggested they bolt right away and talk later. The girl was happy to see someone she knew and hugged him tight, and he assured her everything would be all right. From all the fright, Ellie ended up passing out. She was brought to the county, and Marie hasn't left her side. Late that night, the Earl came to check on Ellie and the nanny. The girl was worried her sister was traumatized from the shock. Then she burst into tears, feeling like she'd put Ellie in danger. Because all this happened because she accepted that guy's offer. Kentrail reminded her that it wasn't her back then. It was another Marie. But he blamed himself, because he thought Derek would be enough protection. Plus, the knight hurt his hand. But he's more upset he couldn't protect Ellie properly. Marie asked about Brielle, and the Earl admitted he's been crying a lot. The butler and tailor are looking after him now. Turns out, the letter to Ellie was a total fake. Her friend's family skipped town in secret, and she couldn't know about it. Clearly, the bad guys were planning to snatch Ellie to put the screws to Marie. And the nanny, remembering that Barry was headed home, freaked out that he might be in danger too. Marie figured he'd be rolling into the capital with a close buddy. And Kentrail promised to send some knights to meet him the day he gets here. Also, the Earl thinks Barry should probably take a leave of absence from the academy. But Marie wasn't mad, because without the Earl, her brother wouldn't even be able to go there in the first place. Suddenly, the nanny asked if Master Hughes had already left. Turns out, he was still at the estate, so she went to pay him a visit. Marie thanked him for saving Ellie and told him about her condition. But the teacher just apologized, wishing he'd noticed everything sooner. His house isn't far from the center, and he knew Ellie had gone out for a walk. He spotted the county's carriage from his window. Hard to miss, that thing. Uges went outside because he was hoping Marie had come too. He even admitted he'd been wanting to get closer to her for a while now, in a respectful way. But now he was blaming himself for not spotting the suspicious people right away. Still, Marie was grateful for that too, because things could have been way worse. And she also apologized for him getting dragged into all this. That sounded weird to Uges, since he genuinely wanted to help. Then, he admitted he'd be tied up with stuff, and they wouldn't be able to see each other much. And he asked Marie to take care of herself until things calmed down. The guy hoped they'd meet again, but under better circumstances. Elsewhere, late at night, a group on horseback was pushing through the snowfall. It was Barry and Sis with a few other guys. They were 3 days past their planned arrival, but the horses were exhausted from the snow. Sis wanted to get there fast. The pain was getting worse, even though he was trying to tough it out. Barry noticed his friend was getting worse, and started to worry about him. A while back, a group of bad guys had surrounded them, and they weren't even trying to catch the students off guard to, take them out. The thugs were holding back, and Barry realized they were trying to take them alive. They managed to fight off the attackers, and Sis wounded a few of them. But even with their skills, there were just too many bad guys. Barry suggested blocking the road so his friend could escape. But it was risky, and Kaylor didn't want to leave him alone. Just then, a villain snuck up behind him and swung a sword. But the knight managed to handle the remaining criminals. Later, as Barry bandaged Sis's wound, he wondered why the Earl had assigned them an escort. After all, Barry had said his sister was just a nanny, so he started asking who he really was. The guy explained that the Earl was kind and just worried about them. Considering it's the Chancellor himself, Keeler just couldn't wrap his head around it. I mean, Kentrail's famous for being cold-blooded and a real piece of work. But Barry kept insisting he was a good guy, at least to his family. Still, he couldn't figure out why they'd been assigned an escort. Just then, the knight assigned to them took down another baddie that popped up. The guys also spotted a few more hiding behind the trees. At this point, they figured it'd be a freaking miracle if they made it to the capital. A little while later, the butler burst in on the Earl, who was chatting with the nanny. He was in such a hurry to deliver the news, he got a stitch in his side. And when he announced Barry was back, Marie and the Earl took off running to meet him. The girl rushed to hug her brother, overjoyed. She'd been waiting forever. And for a while, she kept asking if he was hurt or if anything ached. Barry said he was fine, but his friend was injured and asked them to take care of him. Caesar was immediately led into the house, and Barry asked about Ellie and Brielle. With bitterness in her voice, Marie confessed what had happened to them, and Barry hurried to visit his sister, who was still unconscious. Entering the room, it pained him to look at Ellie's motionless body. Marie explained that Brielle wasn't eating much because of what happened, and he's being watched over by Taylor right now. Just then, the Earl walked into the room. He knew Barry was tired from the journey, but asked him to explain what had occurred. The dude suddenly started shaking, remembering those messed up events. I mean, they were almost there when another attack went down. Then the Count announced that Sis was in critical condition from blood loss. But he's being taken care of, and he also promised to contact Kaylor's family. Barry gave thanks, and right then, Ellie woke up and called out for her brother. She saw her freaked-out family around her, and couldn't immediately figure out what was going on. And her brother told her, from now on, don't leave the house, even if a friend calls. Ellie was still confused, but she guessed something terrible had happened. And Barry admitted that his best friend was hurt, and he was scared for his sister. The girl just shed a tear, realizing that her brother had been attacked too. After that, they all hugged tight, stoked to be alive and back together. A few days later, Sis came to and realized he was in the county. It took a month for all his wounds to heal, but the important thing was, everyone was safe now. The guy thanked his friend and his family for taking such good care of him. Barry visited him with Mari, and then she planned to check up on Ellie. Her brother told her not to worry, since he'd keep an eye on their friend himself. Plus, the Earl let Sis know he could stay there until he was fully recovered. They brought the guy some broth, but he still didn't have much of an appetite. On top of that, he was wondering if his family had been notified about what happened. When he found out they'd sent a letter, Sis asked how Barry was doing. He was feeling way better, and the other knights were doing all right too. They were grateful the kids stuck with them. Otherwise, they would have been toast. Still, Barry had no clue what caused the whole thing to begin with. And Sis sadly hung his head, knowing every family's got their skeletons in the closet. He also figured his buddy just didn't want to bum him out about something. After a while, the guys headed out to the yard to get some practice in. Marie saw her brother with a sword and worried it was too soon for training. But he swore he was almost completely healed and told her not to sweat it. He himself thought his friend could use the help, but his friend immediately started grumbling. Taylor also spotted his training and was impressed by his skill. He was stoked to see that little Barry really had some talent. Sis recognized Taylor, the guy everyone was talking about. He's just a commoner who got into the academy and a fencing prodigy. And judging by how Barry was acting around him, Sis figured his buddy had no clue. Then Barry introduced his academy friend to the teacher. Sis politely introduced himself, and his name rang a bell for Taylor. He'd actually been looking into this guy on the Earl's orders recently. The Kaler family stays neutral in the power struggles and lives way out in the sticks. Sis is the youngest son, and he stays out of things for his older brother's sake. He's known as a genius at the academy, but injuries are keeping him from showing off right now. So Taylor suggested Barry get in a little practice with him. The kid was totally down, and they crossed wooden swords. Meanwhile, Ellie and Brielle were watching the fight, jaws dropped. The little dude was stoked that his foster brother was such a badass, and Sis admitted that Barry was holding back, and that his attacks were killer. The kid really was crushing it, and Taylor was even impressed. His attacks were super polished, which is rare for a student his age. Taylor gave Barry props, and even joked that nobody should mess with him now. And when the sparring match was over, the kids ran up to shower him with praise. I mean, he lasted 10 minutes, and the teacher was impressed by that. And then, out of nowhere, he asked Brielle to show off his skills. The kid knew he couldn't measure up to his brother, so he said he was too shy. But they kept pushing him, and he only agreed when Barry asked. Then he started swinging that little sword around like crazy, yelling like a samurai. And when he was done, everyone was praising him, saying what a good job he did, especially Barry. Sis noticed that he smiles a lot here, whereas at the academy, he's always training with a serious face. And it kinda bugs him, because there are people who don't even light up like that with their own family. He was also jealous of the little kid, who's surrounded by so much love. Just then, Ellie came up to him and thanked him for helping her brother. Right after her, Mari came over too, wanting to express her gratitude. She was genuinely grateful that Sis helped her little brother out. And the guy noticed that the look on her face was different than before. When they first met, her eyes were full of apprehension. He also noticed that this nanny was trying to keep her distance from him, just like everyone else in this family. Barry acted exactly the same way when they first met. But Sis was always well-liked. He's handsome and has outstanding skills. He never expected anything like that, and he was treated well as a kid. And yet, there was one exception at the academy. Sis often annoyed Barry, and he'd get angry, even scold him if something wasn't done right. And along with everything else, Kaler felt like he'd finally made a real friend. Barry was always talking about his family, and Sis convinced him to go visit them for the holidays. But when he got there, he realized these people didn't like him, that they were actually scared of him. But now, he was getting thanked. And not as Kaler, but as Sis. The kid was getting this much genuine kindness for the first time ever, and he was just as sincere when he thanked them back. Later, Derek reported to the Count that when they went to recover the bodies of those who attacked Barry, they were gone. And the guy who attacked Ellie left behind a keychain with a symbol on it. Plus, Derek had a feeling the bad guy left it there on purpose, so they wouldn't be able to figure out who was really calling the shots. So the Earl decided to set up a secret rendezvous to dig up more intel. The next day, Ellie was sketching pictures, and Brielle had to guess what they were. The little girl's drawings weren't exactly masterpieces. Even Cy and Barry couldn't make heads or tails of them, but somehow the kid nailed it every time, and Ellie would then explain her scribbles. Right now, she drew a net for catching dragonflies, like they did last summer, and Barry told his buddy not to overthink it, since it was just a game with the kids. Kaler was watching Brielle, and he just wanted to brush his cheek, even once. He'd never been around little guys like that before, 'cause he didn't have any younger brothers. Barry noticed that his sister was getting pretty attached to Brielle, and for the next game, the girl suggested playing wishes, and the boys had to go first. Sis was down for some fun and asked what they should do. The request was simple. He and Barry had to give Brielle and Ellie piggyback rides. Their fun was so adorable, even the maids stopped to watch. And Kaylor even enjoyed giving the little one a ride. He realized both kids had energy to burn. It started with simple piggybacks, then the game turned into a race. And when Ellie spotted the treehouse, she asked her brother to put her down there. Both little ones were dropped off at the ladder so the guys could catch their breath. But Sis noticed the treehouse and was stoked. He never had one of those. Brielle bragged that his uncle built the treehouse for him, and Sis gave him props. So he finally gets it. The Count's a genuinely good dude, just like his buddy said. But then Kaylor, glancing at Brielle, decided to act on that thing he'd been wanting to do. First, he gave him a little poke on the shoulder, just to get the kid's attention. And when he turned around, Sis touched his soft, silky cheek. His skin was so smooth, he just wanted to sink his finger right in, like it was dough. But Brielle didn't whine at all. He just took it like a champ. Still, his patience didn't last forever, and he asked him to stop it. That's when Ellie got all riled up, 'cause he never let her poke him. But he let the guests do it. Brielle's explanation was that this guy had given him a piggyback ride, and he said it with such a straight face that nobody could keep from cracking up. By evening, though, the guy's shoulders were killing him, especially Barry, lugging his heavy sister around. Mari noticed that while those two were grumbling, Sis was carrying Brielle. The little dude played so hard and got so tired, he crashed before he even made it to bed. She scooped him up to carry him to his room. And she told all the kids they were awesome today. After she said that, Sis started thinking again about how he finally gets what a real family looks like. The next day, Ellie went out to the yard, minding her own business. She was trying to be sneaky when she suddenly felt someone behind her. For a second, she even got a flashback to that feeling. But when she turned around, it was Derek standing over her again in all black. The girl was happy to see him. He was exactly who she wanted to meet. She was curious where he'd been. And the knight held out a gift for her, a bunny-shaped mirror for picking out his outfit last time. Ellie explained that he didn't have to do that, but Derek wanted to thank her. And the little one accepted the cute gift. She really loved it. Suddenly, the huge knight dropped to one knee in front of her and started apologizing for everything awful she had to go through. Then, he held out another mirror to the little girl and asked her to give it to the nanny. Ellie's imagination went wild, thinking Marie and Derek were close. He knew nobody would ever guess the real reason why. Truth is, the knight wanted to apologize for ever doubting the nanny. He still thought she might be involved somehow, but he was sure she wasn't the mastermind. Out of the blue, Ellie told Derek she wanted to learn how to protect herself. She didn't want to ask her brother or Taylor, didn't want them to worry, and the knight advised her to run like hell if she was ever in danger. He could tell the girl was seriously shaken up by what happened, even though she wasn't showing it. So he promised to teach her a few moves, but still told her to get out of there at the first chance she got. Meanwhile, Marie headed to the library to pick out some books, when suddenly, the Earl walked in, but he looked dead serious. The girl realized she was standing near the window where the shot came from. For a split second, she felt that same feeling she had back then. Cantrell asked what book the nanny was looking for this time. His voice sounded worried and a little shaky. He didn't want Marie coming here alone. He suggested asking the maids or other servants to do it for her. Marie didn't want to bother other people over something so small, but the Earl insisted, even offering to help her himself every time. The nanny decided to change the subject and explained she was looking for a book about noble families. After all, the Earl had once said he was suspicious of his uncle and the Queen, so she wants to find out where that family comes from, since she's not from around here. Then Cantrell, after thinking for a couple of seconds, decided to tell her something. He showed her some notes and a keychain with the Queen's palace emblem, and confessed that the keychain belonged to Ellie's stalker. Suspecting the Queen, the Earl ordered his men to infiltrate the palace. But the thing is, whenever the uncle visits, all the servants get the boot. And on top of that, the Queen hasn't done anything else suspicious since. However, the Earl did dig up some dirt on the Queen's personal life. She's been splurging on cosmetics and luxury goods to keep the king happy. A lot of people thought the king and queen's marriage was the romance of the century. But the Earl's suspected for a while now that it's all just a sham. The king himself has hated Kevin from day one. Turns out, things were way worse than the Count first thought. And when he showed Marie the proof, she realized they were trying to pin the blame on the Queen. So, judging by that, the real culprit might be someone in the Queen's inner circle. Cantrell was kicking himself for not catching the guys who jumped Barry, because if they had, they could have squeezed them for more intel. But Marie smiled, reassuring him that the Count was already doing everything he could. Just then, the butler walked in, saying a letter had arrived from the palace. It was an invitation from the Queen, but something about it struck the butler as really off. The weird thing was, the letter wasn't addressed to the Count, but to Marie. She couldn't figure out why she was suddenly being invited, and worried she'd done something wrong in the past. But the Count reassured her, saying he'd vetted her background, and she had no criminal record. So she's free to attend the annual event without worry. The Count himself never goes, and he's skipping it this year too. But Marie decided to go anyway, because who knows what kind of trouble might be waiting for her down the line. And if the Queen's involved in the attempts on her life, this is a chance to find something out. It suddenly hit Marie that she doesn't even know basic etiquette, and she'll probably have to greet the king himself. Seeing her anxiety, the Count promised to teach her everything personally, The girl was practically speechless. He'd already helped her so much. And then the Count casually dropped that he also wants to give her a gift. But it was a surprise, and Kentrail asked the nanny to turn around. Marie did as he asked, then felt him move the hair away from her neck. While she was trying to figure out what was going on, the Earl put a necklace with a little flower on her. He figured out that she actually did like accessories, and decided to pick something out. The necklace looked expensive, and Marie wasn't sure if she could accept something like that. The Earl wanted the nanny to wear it to the event. Plus, it's small, so it won't hurt Brel. The girl smiled sweetly and thanked him for such a beautiful gift. Soon, the day arrived when Sisu had to go back. He was sad to say goodbye too, when everyone came out to see him off. You could really tell Brielle was bummed that his new friend was leaving. Seeing the little guy practically bursting into tears, Sis knelt down next to him. Then, he took his tiny hand and confessed that the months he'd spent here were way more fun than all the years he'd spent back home. Sis told the kid not to cry and promised he'd come back to play with him again. And Mari chimed in, reminding them that they'd see each other again at the Queen's event. Only Barry wouldn't be there, because he's staying home with Ellie. Sis glanced at the girl, remembering all the fun they'd had together. And Barry even admitted to his friend that he was taking a break next semester. Noticing Sis just gave a small smile, he pointed out that he didn't have any friends there anymore. But he advised him to hide his nasty attitude, and then people would be drawn to him. After that, they said their goodbyes again, and Kaylor left the Earl's estate. As evening approached, everyone gathered in the living room. Brielle was busy drawing. The Earl was buried in his papers, while Marie, as usual, kept an eye on the kids. And she decided to tell Kentrail how well the children had bonded. After all, Ellie couldn't stop bragging about how the four of them made an awesome team. Sis made a great impression on them, and Marie even felt bad that he couldn't stay longer. But he needs to prepare for the event and then head off to the academy. And then she remembered that they had sent many letters to his family, but no one had come to visit him. But in this world, it's not uncommon for second sons to get the short end of the stick, although that wasn't the case in the Earl's family. He always got along with his older brother. "Hold up, sorry to interrupt," the servant said, "but that stuff the Earl ordered just got here." Kentrail was stoked. Perfect timing on the clothes. It's Mari's first big thing, and he wanted to make sure she looked the part. When she saw the dress, the girl was speechless. It looked crazy expensive. And when she unfolded it and held it up to herself, she was just, wow, it's all gorgeous. But the Earl already gave her that killer necklace. But then she noticed that Ellie got a new outfit too. The little one was way more chill, just happy like any kid would be. And she bolted to the other room to try her new duds on right away. Mari thanked Kentrail for thinking of her sister too. The Earl noticed the nanny always put his sister and brother first, but he wants her to enjoy life to the fullest too. Marie was visibly flustered, almost relieved the kids were distracted by their gifts. Then, she confessed she'd prepared something for the Earl as well, so they headed out to the garden, where Barry had to do some digging. And while he was digging the hole, Brielle came flying towards Marie, yelling that he'd finished writing the letter. The girl had an idea that the kids absolutely loved. Where she grew up, they did something like this at least once a year. Then she pulled out a small box and explained it was a time capsule. You put letters and objects in the box, then dig them up sometime later. So Marie just asked the kids to write down what they'd want to tell themselves in a few years. Plus, it's a cool way for them to remember what their childhood was like. Brielle decided to toss his favorite fairy tale book into the capsule, because he thinks he's too old for it now. He gave the book a dramatic goodbye, promising to come back for it later. Marie also wanted to use this time capsule thing to teach the kids to look forward to the future with hope. The Count was clueless about all this, so the nanny had to spell it out for him. She wants the kids to not be scared of what's coming, because of all the messed up stuff going on. The Count was told to write a letter too, which he did, no questions asked. As he put it in the box, he was thinking that Marie's the only one who doesn't get it. Everything he gives her is just stuff, but she's sharing the most precious thing she has with him and Brielle. Soon, the day came to leave for the event, and Barry got all dressed up too. Even Brielle noticed that Ellie's brother looked seriously awesome in that outfit. And while the boys were complimenting Ellie's getup, Marie came out to meet them. She put on the dress the Earl gave her, and looked like a princess now. Seeing her, Brielle immediately declared that she was the most beautiful in the world. A carriage with white horses was already prepared for them. And when the butler offered Marie his hand to help her into the carriage, the Earl stopped him because he wanted to do it himself, and offered his hand instead. Marie blushed a little, and the butler smiled off to the side, like he knew what was really going on between them. But the Earl helped the nanny climb in, then offered Ellie his hand to help her up. Barry was next, since they decided to bring him and his little sister along too. Inside, Ellie noticed Marie was checking out a new piece of jewelry. It was seriously gorgeous, and the little kid knew her sister couldn't afford something like that. So she started demanding the truth about where she got it, even threatened that there was no way she was getting out of this one. But then the Earl himself hopped into the carriage, and now they're ready to roll. He just asked the butler one last time to make sure everything was in order back at the house. They got to the palace pretty quick. At least that's how it seemed to Marie. She was getting nervous, even though all she had to do was go and do what she'd been taught. She told the kids to run straight to Taylor if there was any trouble, and Barry told her to take care of herself and him too. But the Earl calmed everyone down, explaining that nothing would happen to them inside the palace. He promised to keep a personal eye on them so they could just enjoy the event. Then they entered the hall, and Marie was shocked at how many nobles were there. They started greeting the Chancellor one by one as he led his family through. People also started whispering, noticing an unknown girl with Earl Durant. And Brielle immediately perked up when he saw Jaden. The friends had missed each other so much, it felt like they hadn't seen each other in forever. Jaden pointed out where his mom and dad were standing. But then his sister's voice cut in. Sienna, looking mad as hell, was heading towards her brother, who'd left without a word. The girl was about to give him a piece of her mind, but then she noticed the Count was watching her. Barry was standing next to him, and he'd also picked up on the commotion. So, Ciela clammed up, because in that instant, this guy had completely stolen her heart. Then Jaden explained that it was the Count and his nephew, whom she immediately greeted. Next, Jake came over, still in disbelief that his old friend actually showed up. He figured he'd see pigs fly before that guy ever graced an event like this. But he immediately got down to business and reported that Vidal had officially received his title and lands. The guy bowed deeply to the Chancellor, not even knowing how to thank him enough. Then, Marie remarked that things were going well for the Count at work, despite the challenges. But then she noticed that Master Ukes was here too. He must have felt her staring, because he turned around and was even more surprised to see her. But he walked over and politely asked how she was doing. And she admitted that she was doing well, and that Brielle had come with them too. But she immediately blushed when Ukes noticed how beautiful she looked today. Then, Mari confessed that she was here because of the Queen's invitation, but she figured it was because Her Majesty wanted to see Brielle. The girl couldn't see any other reason to invite a simple nanny, but the tutor was sure that the Queen loved children, which is why she invited them. But Mari thought that statement was really strange. Then, Ukes offered her some champagne, saying it was sweet and delicious. She passed on the booze, so he offered her something non-alcoholic. Even after everything that happened, this guy was still being nice to her. He wondered where the Count was, and Marie explained he was talking with a friend. The tutor was still trying to get closer to the nanny, and this was his opportunity. But the second he opened his mouth, Kentrail walked over, holding Brielle, and the girl instantly remembered that the little guy hadn't seen the tutor in ages. The Count's face was serious, and Brielle started complaining that Uges was alone with Marie. Without letting him explain, the Count took the nanny, saying the banquet was about to start. The tutor just managed to wish the nanny a good time. Uges isn't dumb, and judging by the Count's jealous mug, he knew he was out of the running. Meanwhile, Ciela was totally hogging Barry's attention, yapping his ear off with all sorts of stories. That's when Sis rolled up, stoked that he'd finally tracked Barry down. And Barry was just as stoked, because he finally had an excuse to ditch the chatterbox. The girl was bummed, but she didn't throw a fit, she just hung back and waited. And she didn't wander off too far. While her beloved was chatting with his buddy, the guys caught on to what was happening and moved away themselves so they could talk about the academy. Sis confessed that he'd taken a leave of absence too, which is why he was looking for Barry to break the news. Barry was obviously shocked, but turns out Keeler was just bored out of his skull. Just then, Barry noticed some people nearby were giving them the stink eye, especially that ginger dude, who looked seriously ticked off. Barry figured out it was C's family, and C's was glad his buddy caught on. They didn't exactly look alike, but it was pretty obvious. And the reason for the stink eye is that C's could screw up his brother's chances of becoming head of the family if he graduates early, which is why he's dragging his feet. But he told his friend not to sweat it. They'd see each other next semester. Meanwhile, Marie, watching C's, realized the original plot was about to kick off. And while she was lost in thought, they announced the arrival of the royal family. The king immediately thanked everyone for attending the event. And as he gave his speech, Marie worried she was dressed a little too loud compared to the queen. The Count explained that the queen just didn't want to draw attention to herself. She used to love bright colors as a kid. But the king probably changed that. I almost feel bad for Marie. She can't even wear the dresses she wants. And even with all that beauty, she's just bending to someone else's tastes. Marie was staring at the queen without even realizing it, and they locked eyes. But then Brielle pipes up, going on about how beautiful Her Majesty is. And just like that, Her Majesty's attention is all on the kid. She almost reached out to him, but he was just a little too far away. So, she just smiled and followed after the king. And Marie, watching all this, knew something was definitely off. But instead of getting lost in thought, she decided to ask the Count about it. That's when the king walked up and asked Marie if she was the County's nanny. Then he explained he'd called her over because he really wanted to meet her. The girl got flustered, but introduced herself and greeted him properly. Then, answering his questions, she admitted she was from the Fiora family. That family had their title and lands taken away, and the king remembered it well. Then, he told her the reason why he'd invited her here. He wanted to thank her for taking care of his friend's nephew. That's when Marie realized it wasn't the queen who had invited her, but the king himself. And she confessed she thought the invitation was from Her Majesty. His Majesty was saddened to hear that, since it was his invitation. The queen's just hosting the party is all. Just then, Her Majesty herself strolled over, wanting to say hello. It was a tense moment, But the king kept his cool, just gave a sideways glance, and Marie noticed this woman had a really nice voice. Now that the queen was closer, she could see they weren't kidding about her beauty either. Her Majesty greeted everyone, and then noticed Ellie standing there quietly. And with a smile, she remarked that the pink dress really suited her. Surprised that she was being spoken to, the girl looked up. But then, remembering her manners, she lowered her gaze and thanked the queen, and her flustered behavior struck Her Majesty as utterly charming. Then she introduced herself to Brielle as his uncle's cousin. But the king jumped in again, suggesting the guests take a look around the palace. The earl didn't like that, and politely explained that he'd handle it himself. But Marie caught the drift of what he was saying, and she was totally into it. And they started to leave, leaving the king to greet the others. The earl glanced at Marie and gave her an encouraging smile. Right after that, you could hear His Majesty let out a yell. He was just thrilled to have seen the chancellor smile with his own 2 eyes. Then the king gave those guests the okay to leave, but they weren't planning on sticking around anyway. At that moment, the queen whispered some kind of instruction to a maid. And wouldn't you know it, that maid walked right up to Marie, saying the queen wanted to see her, said she wanted to meet her in the garden, by the gazebo. The count got a bad feeling and told her to say Marie wasn't feeling well, but the nanny stopped him, saying she was sure the queen wouldn't hurt her. She figured anyone who loved kids that much couldn't be capable of doing anything truly evil. Marie also promised Kentrail she'd stay in plain sight, so he wouldn't worry. After that, she followed the maid to where she was supposed to go. The queen was already there, and she told the maid to bring the guest closer. Now her face looked harder, and she was fidgeting with the petals of a flower, and Marie suddenly felt a lump rising in her throat. The queen was curious why the king hired a nanny, and she cleared up the misunderstanding. But Her Majesty suspected the king brought in the nanny as a little something on the side. That scared Marie stiff, and she started protesting like crazy. She couldn't even imagine such a thing, especially since she just met the king today. While they were talking in the conservatory, the earl was watching them from outside. He was trying to stay close, just in case he needed to protect the nanny. But the windows were huge, and the queen spotted him almost immediately. Seeing how the earl cared about this girl, she started to understand why everyone was so interested in her. And Her Majesty felt a pang, because nobody ever paid that kind of attention to her. Right then, Mary realized the queen wasn't the one behind the attempts on her life. She's just a woman who's craving her husband's attention, you know? With that, Her Majesty dismissed the girl. But then Kentrail had to step in, and on the way back, Marie was now racking her brain, trying to figure out who the real culprit was. That's when she spotted Siz's brother nearby, and their conversation definitely wasn't friendly. The brother was chewing Siz out, telling him to know his place and stop eyeing the family head position. Seeing all this, Marie was trying to remember, because this guy never showed up in the original story. But then it hit her. In the novel, Siz was already the head of the family, and now she was tormented by guesses about how the heck he got there. The girl was so lost in thought that she jumped when the count approached her. She didn't want to bother him with new suspicions, especially since she hadn't figured things out herself yet. She got curious if there was another issue before the events in the novel kicked off. But Kentrail noticed Marie was super worried and told her to chill out, and to stop filling her head with a bunch of nonsense and overthinking everything. After that, he asked her to come home with him, since it was getting late. The next day, back in the county, Marie showed off her piano skills. She played a song she knew, and surprisingly, her fingers obeyed. The count liked the melody, which he was hearing for the first time ever. And leaning closer to the nanny, he said he especially liked her technique. As he spoke, the girl got nervous because he started holding her shoulder. He was about to promise to play some local tunes, but then they realized they were way too close. They both jumped back, totally stunned. Kentrail quickly stepped aside, and Marie caught her breath. But it was also right then that she realized just how knowledgeable the count was about music. She suddenly wondered if he would have become the head of the family if his brother were still alive. And if so, Kentrail would probably be a wandering musician. He chuckled at that, but agreed that's probably how it would have gone down. Marie suddenly realized that in that scenario, they probably never would have met. And who knows if she would have even been interested in a guy like him. Suddenly, the count took her hand, reminding her that fate had brought them together. Then, he asked her to tell him about what happened at the palace yesterday. He tells her a lot, even though Marie knows he's holding back. She did mention seeing Cease argue with his older brother, though, and she confessed that in the book she read, Cease was already head of the family. So she suspects the main story is about to kick off any minute now. That's why Marie's freaking out. She has no clue what's coming next. According to the story, the count went ballistic after Brielle's death and started going after Cease. Now he's thinking the guy might have been involved with them from the get-go. But then he had a terrifying thought. What if Cease did away with Brielle himself? Marie immediately shot that down. She's sure the guy isn't that messed up. Just then, the kids burst in, with a hyped-up Brielle leading the charge. He immediately started asking his uncle what a dolphin looked like. He thought a cloud looked like a dolphin, but Ellie argued that it didn't. Even though the girl had never seen a dolphin, she was sure that Brielle hadn't either. Then Mari looked out the window and realized which cloud they were talking about. If you squint, it kinda looks like a dolphin, and the little guy was super proud, especially since he'd already seen a dolphin on a flashcard that Mari drew a while back. Ellie kept arguing that you could only see a real dolphin at the ocean. Suddenly, the Earl suggested that they go to the ocean next time they get out of the house. Hearing that, the kids were completely stunned, not believing their ears. But Kentrail was serious. He thought it was the right thing to do, because life's too short, you know? Besides, he liked the idea and wanted to treat the kids. But then he realized he hadn't checked with the nanny and asked for her take. Mary didn't even have to think. She was totally on board. Something inside told her this trip was going to be a blast. Still, the situation was a real head-scratcher. Mary was dying to crack this case and nail the perp. We can cross the queen off the list for sure, but the king's kinda sus. But if it was him, he would have wiped the whole Durant County off the map. Lost in thought, she sat by the window while it poured outside, and she noticed the time capsule had risen from the ground, exposed by the rain. Determined to fix things, Mari threw on her cloak and headed for that tree. It was dark out, and only when she got closer did she realize the box was different. This wasn't the time capsule they'd buried recently. A letter addressed to Aerie was sticking out of it, about her family. The woman who wrote it had to leave this place, but begged someone to tell the truth. The letter was from Kentrail's mother, and he knew they used to exchange letters. But what baffled the nanny was that this letter was hidden in a wooden box under the tree. And the Earl explained that his father was strict, but his mother loved romance and started games like this. Guess this box wasn't buried very deep, since the rain washed it up. Plus, lucky for us, the letter itself is still in perfect condition. The Count even regretted not spending more time with her. She died too young. Marie gave Kentrail a sympathetic look. Then she asked what his mother had been so interested in. The Countess had learned some secret about her daughter-in-law and asked for clarification. The Count brought up the strange letter from Aerie and the location of Brielle's birthmark. It's entirely possible the answer to his mother's question was written in that letter, which might have been altered, and now the Count will send people to that house to verify the information. Right now, he wanted to talk to Marie about something else, and he thanked her for always believing in him and giving him strength. But then his face suddenly turned very serious, and the girl became wary. He was scolding her because he didn't want her going out in the rain like that again. Even if she was worried about the capsule, she should have asked him for help, because she could get sick, or she could fall and break an arm, and that would have really bummed out the Earl. At first, Marie lowered her head, looking guilty, but then she suddenly started laughing. The Earl was stunned, and she confessed that she just liked how much he cared about her. Still, she promised she wouldn't do anything that dumb again. The next day, Brielle was running down the hallway, yelling for the nanny. The Earl saw him and got worried that something was wrong. But the little guy explained that Jaden was coming to visit soon. That's why he was looking for Marie, to ask her to make a chocolate cake. But then Brielle noticed his uncle was holding a palette and a brush. He realized the guy was painting, which he thought was kinda weird. Kentrail just smiled and invited him into the room to take a look. It was a separate room with a bunch of easels set up. The Count had been working in here for a while and decided to call it a day. The kids started checking out the paintings, and one of them caught his eye. It was a painting of Marie smiling, and it actually looked just like her. Kentrail had decided to paint her portrait to give her as a gift for her next birthday. The little dude kept staring at the painting and suddenly asked if his uncle liked Marie. The Count remembered how Brielle had declared last time that Marie was going to marry him. I was stumped. Didn't know how to answer without making the kid cry. But he kept pushing for an answer. But after that whole mess, Kentrail really didn't want to lie to his nephew. So he asked Gabriel what he actually felt about the nanny right now. The kid confessed that he liked her a lot, because she was part of their precious family. So he loved her just as much as he loved his uncle. Then, he admitted that Marie looked really pretty in the painting, so he figured his uncle liked her too. The Count was a little shocked, but things were starting to make a lot more sense, and after ruffling the kid's blonde curls, he agreed with what he said. The kid was super happy that his uncle liked the nanny as much as he did. One beautiful sunny day, Marie decided to do a massive load of laundry. Turns out there were way more sheets than she thought, and she was starting to get tired. The maids kept telling her to quit, but she was stubborn, especially since her brother and sister were helping, who were chiming in, saying they weren't tired at all, just to support their sister. The maid praised Ellie for saying that, but suggested she'd be better off playing. But Marie just wanted to help the maids, knowing how much work they had. As thanks, they invited her to come grab some fancy cookies from the capital. The girl agreed and stepped aside to rest for a bit, and the maids started whispering that a guest had suddenly arrived to see the Earl, some baron's daughter, and a real looker too. Just hearing that, Marie suddenly noticed Kentrail strolling around with some redhead. After a while, the Earl himself was looking for Marie, but then angry Ellie crossed his path. Hands on her hips, she immediately started grilling me about who the woman was. I knew exactly who this little firecracker was talking about, and I even felt a twinge of guilt. Still, I had to ask why she was so worked up about it. She wanted to spill the beans about how her sister almost had a heart attack, but just told me to go see her. Meanwhile, Marie was in her room, stashing the necklace in a box. She took it off because she couldn't stand wearing anything the Count had given her anymore. She couldn't shake the maid's gossip about the girl he'd been seen with. They looked pretty cozy, but she didn't know if the Count was seeing her in the novel. All these thoughts just brought her down, and then someone knocked. Marie snapped out of it and asked who it was. Kentrail's voice came from behind the door, and she got all flustered again. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to hide her feelings from the Earl right now. Without opening the door, she explained she was busy and promised to find him later. The Earl could hear the sadness in her voice, and he realized he should explain everything right away, so she wouldn't be upset. He explained that the woman he was with in the garden was Baron Jake's wife. After those words, Marie felt like she'd been struck by lightning, but then she felt relieved. Happy that it wasn't just some random girl, she ran to the door herself, while Kentrail on the other side kept asking her to open up. The Earl realized that the girl who just came out to him was jealous. Deep down, he was now hoping that her feelings were at least a little bit mutual. As she lowered her face in front of him, all guilty-like, he called her by her real name, and he asked her to call him by his name from now on, not by his title. She totally froze up. It's unheard of for a nanny to call an Earl by his first name. Then, he started teasing her, asking if she didn't like the way he said her name. Marie wasn't just red anymore. She was bright crimson, struggling to find the right words. And then she just yelled that she'd explain it to him next time. Kentrail was expecting a slightly different response, but he really liked the nanny's reaction, and he just smiled at her. Then, he started explaining the reason he'd called for the Baroness. She was tight with his sister-in-law, and they wrote letters to each other all the time. That's why Kentrail figured she might know something. Like, was that letter from the wooden box actually written by Aerie? The Baroness confirmed that, yeah, his sister-in-law wrote them. But that letter talking about the birthmark? The handwriting's weirdly different. As Kentrail's saying this, he spots the jewelry he gave her in the box. But he wasn't sweating it, because he knew why it was there. So he got back to the point, saying he suspected that if this was a carefully guarded secret, then her maternal grandpa wouldn't just spill the beans either. So the best bet right now is for the Count to go there himself. Mari was freaked out, worried he'd get ambushed on the road, and the mansion would be attacked. But the Count hadn't decided yet, saying they'd talk it over after their little guest arrived. A little later, they met the Baroness, who was with her kids. Mari, feeling much better, greeted their guest cheerfully. And at first, the ladies chatted about how mischievous the kids were being. Then, the Baroness announced that Jaden had brought a gift this time. The boy held out a small keychain to Mari as a present, and asked her to make a doll for his sister, just like his. The girl agreed, and confessed that she'd baked a chocolate cake, which Jaden loved. Then she asked the guests to wait a bit while she went to get it. And on the way to the kitchen, I was mentally kicking myself for misjudging such an awesome guy. Now I was dying of embarrassment, wondering what Kentrail thought of me. But I'm glad the Count didn't freak out. He actually caught up to me to help carry the cake. Just then, the maid carrying a pot of boiling water tripped over absolutely nothing, and the Count rushed over, because all that boiling water was about to spill on Marie. Before the girl could even figure out what was happening, it was already going down. In an instant, Marie squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the scalding water. But when she didn't feel any burning, she opened her eyes again. At that moment, the Count was already holding her, having managed to shield her from the danger. The cook's scream made it clear. The hot water got him. He'd covered the nanny. He kept telling her he was fine, even though he was shaking like a leaf from the searing pain. As the servant screamed for a doctor, Marie felt a chill run down her spine from the worry. She'd never read about a guy taking a pot of boiling water for a girl in any romance novel. Kentrail was put to bed, where they gave him compresses and slathered him with ointment. But Marie couldn't calm down, feeling guilty, even though the Earl kept insisting he'd be okay soon. He said it was just a minor incident, and that it didn't hurt at all. Then, he gave the doctor a look that said, "You back me up and say it's just a little burn." But Marie was still worried. This was the second time the Earl had gotten hurt protecting her, and she didn't believe him this time, because she could tell when he was lying. But when she asked him not to get hurt for her anymore, the Earl refused. She started complaining, saying she hated that he was suffering because of her. Marie confessed she couldn't live with herself if anything happened to him because of her. Still, Kentrail would rather have it this way than see her hurt in any way. The nanny's feelings just intensified. She felt like she was about to cry and left the room. And the Earl now felt more pain from her sadness than from his burns. To shake off some of the gloom, Marie met up with the Baroness. And they were back to talking about the kids, gushing about how cute it was that they'd become friends. But no matter how hard Marie tried to hide her sadness, the Baroness noticed. Plus, the nanny's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she held the umbrella against the scorching sun. And without asking too many questions, the Baron's wife reassured her that everything would be all right. Yeah, the Count's a tank. He'll bounce back quick. But that doesn't make things any easier on Marie. A little later, the kids went to check up on Kentrail. He kept saying he was fine, but Brielle wasn't buying it, not with how worried Marie was. So the Count explained that the nanny always overreacts, even to a little scratch. But the boy was still bummed, and Jaden tried to cheer him up, saying his uncle was tough, but the nanny could have gotten hurt. Brielle just wished neither of them had gotten hurt at all. Besides, he'd overheard the nanny freaking out, just wanting the Count to be safe and sound. And Kentrail started to realize how this kid had survived the accident. His parents had shielded him, but now the question was, had he really been lucky at all? Now he was sitting by the bed, crying, scared that his uncle might get hurt because of him. The kid's tears were so bitter, he could barely choke out his last words. Kentrail's heart clenched. He'd never felt so bad for the little guy. Remembering the danger he could be in from some shadowy creep, the Earl just sank into despair. He scooped the little one up, hugged him tight, and begged for his forgiveness. Brielle was still crying, but he kept telling his uncle to get better soon. Time passed, and Marie herself took care of the Earl, applying ointment to his burns. Then, she carefully rebandaged him, trying not to cause him any pain. She tried to avoid talking about sad stuff, and when she was done, she got ready to leave. Cantrell could tell she was still bummed and holding a grudge about his stubbornness, so he grabbed her hand, stopped her, and apologized, saying none of this was her fault. The Earl wouldn't dream of making her worry. He just couldn't let her get hurt, period. That's when she spun around and said she didn't want to see him suffer either. Because, let's face it, some stuff you just can't stop from happening. Plus, Marie knows if the Earl hadn't saved her back then, things would have been way worse, and that bugs her. Then she noticed Cantrell was smiling, but it was because she said she didn't want him to suffer. Smiling even wider, Cantrell admitted that was good to hear. Meanwhile, somewhere else, amidst total chaos, the whole room was splattered with blood. Blood was all over the guy's sword too, the one he was holding while standing over the corpses. Just then, a maid brought the master of the house his tea, but seeing that gruesome scene, she just started shaking in terror. And from the depths of the room, in the dim light, an evil gaze was fixed on her, the gaze of the person who orchestrated this carnage. But is he the secret culprit?